a man crawled through the dirt, desperately dragging himself away from something. He begged the monster-like creature behind him to stop. He'd come too far. He didn't want to go back. The creature didn't listen. In one swift motion, it split his head in two. It all started when Kujo, a 40-year-old divorced man, overslept. He lived completely alone, and he was supposed to get ready for work. Before getting out of bed, he checked his phone to see if his daughter replied to his message, but there was nothing. Kujo just sighed and complained about his hip, then brushed his teeth and ate breakfast before heading out. Kujo worked all day as a traffic enforcer at an ongoing road construction site. It was hard and cold, but he endured it. That's when he noticed a commotion nearby. A bunch of drunk men. One of them had fallen and knocked over a bunch of bicycles, causing him to bleed from the head. Kujo immediately came over to check if they were okay. He tried to help the injured guy up and get him first aid. But Kujo's gloves were dirty from working all day, so the drunk man punched him in the face, yelling at Kujo not to touch him because he made his coat dirty. Then they left. Kujo sat on the ground, hearing his boss yelling at him not to leave his post or he'd fire his ass. But before going back, Kujo still fixed the bicycles that got knocked over. During break time, Kujo's coworker told him he was too kind, that he should have ignored those thugs. But Kujo just couldn't help himself. The coworker warned him that if he kept going like this, things would only get worse. Kujo just sighed and said he was already aware of that. His wife didn't love him anymore because of the way he is. Then Kujo's phone buzzed. It was a message from his daughter telling him to stop asking about school over and over since nothing interesting happens every day, and reminding him about their meeting tomorrow. Kujo's eyes lit up. He was so happy. He'd finally be seeing her again after a while. His coworker's eyes darkened. He admitted he was jealous. His own wife was divorcing him, and she wasn't allowing him to see their daughter anymore. He apologized for bringing it up, but Kujo told him it was fine. Then the boss arrived, telling Kujo to get back to work. Before leaving, Kujo noticed his dejected face and couldn't help but tell his coworker that if there was anything he could do, just say the word. Since he wanted to help, his coworker told him they should meet after work. The next morning, they met at a family diner. The coworker laid out a contract on the table. It said that if he paid his wife 3 million yen in compensation, he'd be allowed to see his daughter again. But he didn't have that kind of money. He begged Kujo to use Kujo's name on the contract. Kujo knew this was a bad idea, that he'd get screwed over again, but he was such a bitch he still agreed. But then, Kujo's daughter came in clutch and poured water all over the contract, shocking the two of them. Yu, Kujo's daughter, only asked her father what he thought he was doing. Kujo could only ask how she even found him here. Yu reminded him she installed a GPS app on his phone because he got lost last time, and she had a feeling something was up when he said he needed to do one thing before their meeting. Yu dragged her father away while the coworker begged them not to leave, saying he'd pay them back and he just needed to borrow Kujo's name. But of course, Yu told him she didn't trust him and asked why he was being asked to pay compensation in the first place. She told him to stop involving her father in his problems, then left with Kujo. The coworker was devastated. Outside, Kujo tried to catch up to his daughter, telling her not to be that harsh, trying to justify why he was helping his coworker. But Yu just cried, saying it was always the same, how their family was divorced and separated, yet Kujo was always more worried about others than about himself. If he ended up in debt again, she said, then Kujo would never get to see her again. Yu, still crying and walking away, told him that if he insisted on helping, she was done with him. Kujo ran after her and tried to stop her. He apologized, admitted he was wrong, and begged her not to give up on him. Yu told him that if he was going to say that, he needed to actually be better, and asked him why she had to be the one always protecting him. Kujo finally realized how pathetic he was. He hugged his daughter and apologized, tears welling up in his eyes. He gritted his teeth and promised he would never do something like that again, that instead, he'd focus on becoming a better father. The father and daughter cried together. Yu told him he'd better keep his promise and that it was his turn to protect her because he was her dad. Kujo assured his daughter that he would. After that, Yu said she was hungry after all that crying and they should go eat. Kujo was serious. He must change for the sake of his daughter. While Yu was telling him what she wanted to eat, she didn't notice Kujo's coworker standing in front of her. The coworker grabbed Yu and took her hostage, holding a knife he stole from the diner. Kujo could only ask what he was doing. The coworker started ranting. It turns out the reason he and his wife divorced was because he abused her. He pointed the tip of the knife right at Yu's eyeball. Kujo panicked and begged him to stop. He asked why he was doing this. The coworker screamed that it was because of Kujo, because Kujo said he would help but didn't keep his word. All of this was happening because of him. But honestly, not really. The coworker is just a piece of shit. The coworker then pulled out the wet contract and told Kujo to sign it or he would kill Yu. Yu told her dad not to listen to him, that trash like him didn't need compensation, and that he should just call the police. The coworker got angry and tried to stab Yu, but Kujo rushed toward them and tried to stop him. The coworker panicked and swung the knife in Kujo's direction, stabbing him in the neck and slicing him. Kujo fell to the ground, unable to move his body. His eyelids suddenly felt so heavy. The last thing Kujo saw was his daughter bawling, begging him not to close his eyes. Kujo's vision dimmed. His eyes were about to close, and the final thing he saw was that his daughter was still in danger. When Kujo woke up, he was resting on a field of flowers. He was shocked and started wondering where he was. Then he noticed silhouettes of other people nearby, also confused about where they were. As they began to panic, a woman in a black dress shut them all up. She was Timoria, and she introduced herself as the guide of this place. The people wondered if this was some sort of prank. One couple asked where they were and why she brought them here. Timoria explained that they must have forgotten what happened to them, and that this place is where all living things inevitably come in the end. She warned them to brace themselves as she would return their memories. With a snap of her fingers, everyone suddenly felt pain. All of them remembered how they died and the suffering they felt. People were in disbelief. Some even broke down crying, unable to accept what happened. Kujo was shaking, remembering that his daughter had been about to be killed. Timoria offered her condolences and told them this place was the boundary between the world of the living and the netherworld. She guided them toward a river with many boats lined up. She told them to get on. Peaceful death awaited them. But everyone started complaining, saying they couldn't just accept their deaths like that. They told Timoria to send them back immediately. Timoria explained she couldn't. She was only a guide. Kujo kneeled in front of her, begging her to send him back because his daughter was about to be killed. He didn't care if it was temporary. He couldn't let his daughter die because of him. A soldier also stepped forward and said he had young children and couldn't afford to die. He asked if there was any way to return. Since everyone was so desperate to go back, Timoria told them there was only one way to return to the world of the living. Everyone cheered and urged her to tell them. Timoria warned she wouldn't recommend it, but since this was what they wanted, she pointed towards a mountain and told them to head there. At the peak, she said, there was a door. If they entered it, they could be revived. The mountain looked thousands of meters tall. It would probably take many days to climb. Someone asked what would happen if their bodies were cremated before they reached the peak. Timoria assured them that the concept of time didn't exist here. They would be revived at the moment of their death if they entered the door. It sounded tough, but doable. At least that's what they thought. They started asking around if anyone had mountain climbing experience. The soldier raised his hand. Before he died, he had some training. Everyone fired up, thinking they could pull it off if they worked together. Then Timoria told them the twist. Only one person who reaches the peak can enter the door. Everyone was shocked. Complaints erupted. Some of the women said it was unfair since men had physical advantages. Timoria simply said the rule was ordained by God and couldn't be changed. If someone was revived, the door would shut for the next 100 years. The soldier immediately moved, apologizing as he said he had a family and would go ahead. Everyone started to run so they wouldn't fall behind. Kujo also stood up to follow, but Timoria called after them and asked if they were truly sure. The boats of Sanzu would depart soon and would never return. She asked if they wanted a normal death. Everyone replied that they didn't. None of them wanted death. They wanted to live. Kujo also wanted to live for his daughter. He promised to protect her. As they all left, Tamoriya sighed. Entering the forest, Kujo noticed his physical body was the same as when he died, still a 40-year-old frame, no special strength. He wandered through the foggy forest, unable to tell directions, until he heard someone scream. Someone calling for help. Kujo's first instinct was to run to them, but then he remembered this was good for him. Only one person could be revived. Helping others meant lowering his chances. As he walked away, the voice grew weaker, but Kujo's good nature got the better of him. He ran toward the scream, shouting to locate the person. He found a silhouette crouched down and rushed toward it, only to find the mutilated body of the soldier from earlier. Kujo froze and collapsed, vomiting. He was disoriented and shaking, overwhelmed by the sight before him, and unable to comprehend what was happening. He didn't notice the creature behind him until it smashed a stone against the back of his head. Kujo screamed from the pain. When he looked back, he saw a humanoid creature, its body twisted and contorted. Kujo screamed at the horrifying sight. The creature only smashed his face with the stone again. Kujo begged it to stop, but more creatures came, all beating him mercilessly. When his body was completely tenderized, the monster simply smiled at him. If this continued, Kujo would surely die. Remembering his daughter, Kujo gritted his teeth and kicked one monster away. The creature fell back, shocked. Kujo crawled desperately, screaming that he wouldn't let it end like this. But one of the monsters stabbed him in the back of the neck with a wooden spear. As Kujo began to lose consciousness, the monsters drooled and feasted on his flesh. His arm was torn off, his innards spilled out, but Kujo tried to hold on to his consciousness. It was the most painful experience, but he endured it, because he had promised his daughter he would protect her. Then Kujo woke up again. This time, he was buried a foot deep in the soil of the flower field, completely unharmed, naked. He started panicking. How was he here again when he was clearly killed moments ago? Looking around, he realized he was back at the starting point. Kujo wondered if it was all a dream, but it wasn't. The pain, the fear, all of it was real. He stared at the mountain, trying and struggling to understand what kind of place he had ended up in. Tamoriya watched from afar. She observed the foolish sinners who could not ascend to heaven, yet were denied even the mercy of hell. Condemned instead to the mountain, they climbed, failed, died, and returned, again and again. A faint smile touched her lips. Let them challenge the trial as many times as they wished. Resurrection was not salvation, it was payment, and she would watch until their spirits finally broke. Kujo was still confused. He knew he had clearly died. He remembered being eaten alive by those monsters. As he tried to process everything, a hand suddenly burst out of the ground. It was the soldier from earlier, the same one who'd been killed. The man gasped for air, recognized Kujo, and immediately asked why they were both naked. The soldier asked Kujo how something like this could happen, but Kujo explained he had no idea either. He told him that after heading toward the forest, he was suddenly attacked by monsters, and then woke up back here. The soldier remembered the same thing, being attacked from behind and eaten. Kujo, visibly trembling, told him that he had seen the soldier's corpse. That's when the soldier realized the truth. They were being resurrected in new bodies, like a respawn in a video game. The realization terrified him. They were trapped in the worst game imaginable. At first, he found it odd that the guide said it didn't matter how long they took to reach the peak. Even if the path was steep, it shouldn't take long to climb a mountain that wasn't even snowy. If the mountain was full of monsters and dying just sent them back here, then they would be forced to repeat the cycle again and again, forever. Kujo recalled the agony he had endured moments before and felt a cold shiver run through him. The soldier understood that resurrection had to come with a catch, but this was far worse than anything he expected. The two men sat in despair until the soldier finally swallowed his fear and stood up. Kujo asked where he was going. He could get killed again. The soldier simply replied that his son had just been born. His name was So. He was always so cute when he yawned during bath time, looking content and peaceful. The soldier refused to die here and missed watching him grow up. And if this place allowed resurrection, then someone had to be capable of reaching the door someday. He refused to sit and do nothing. Kujo thought of his own daughter. Even though there was no guarantee they would resurrect again, the soldier's determination stirred something in him. Shaking but resolute, he stood up and decided to go with him. The soldier suggested they explore the foothills first. There was no rush, and the others wouldn't make progress with the monsters roaming around. If they understood the mountain better, they might advance faster. Kujo agreed. The soldier extended his hand and introduced himself as Akama. Kujo shook his hand, and the two agreed to move once they were mentally prepared. When they finally began exploring, they noticed something strange. The terrain was completely different from before. They had respawned in a new area. The landscape resembled a volcanic island, and no matter how far they traveled from the mountain, there was only water, not a river like the Sanzu, but a vast lake or sea. It seemed there was no escape except going up the mountain. As they continued, Akama injured his foot. The ground was filled with sharp spikes of rock, nearly impossible to cross barefoot. They needed footwear, but there was nothing usable anywhere. Worse, they found no animals or edible plants. The only vegetation was trees. And apparently, even in the afterlife, they still felt hunger. And the mountain looked at least 6,000 meters tall. Climbing it in 2 or 3 days was impossible. They would need food and water for several days, but they had found none. Trying to stay optimistic, Kujo insisted that there had to be resources somewhere else in the area. They decided to keep exploring. Suddenly, Akama sensed something and yanked Kujo behind a stone pillar. 2 monsters, just like the ones from before, were dragging a corpse and carrying a spiked branch. One of them stabbed the branch into the ground and crucified the body on it. Dozens of other skeletons were already displayed around them. The monsters began chanting. Kujo felt sick at the sight and whispered that they should take a detour before they were discovered. But Akama shook his head and whispered back they should kill the monsters here and move on. Kujo asked why they would even consider attacking the monsters, but Akama explained that as things stood, their best option was to eliminate or incapacitate them. Doing so would give them more room to maneuver. There were only 2 monsters nearby. It was the perfect chance to test whether they could handle them. Kujo remained worried. After all, they had both just died to these creatures. But Akama assured him that if his guess was right, they should be able to pull it off. While the 2 humanoid monsters were praying and carving inscriptions into the ground with a stone, they suddenly heard a loud clang, stone banging against stone. One of them went to investigate, unaware that it was part of the plan. The monster left behind was suddenly grabbed from behind by Akama, who locked his arms around its neck, putting it in a chokehold. It let out a muffled scream. The other monster spotted Akama. It never noticed Kujo behind it. Kujo then tackled the creature from behind and wrapped his arm around its throat, just as Akama had taught him. The monster clawed desperately at Kujo's arm, but he held on. Their plan was working. Earlier, Akama had taught him the basics of a rear chokehold, explaining that if executed correctly, the monster would pass out, and if the hold was maintained, it would die. If it didn't work, Kujo's job was simply to hold it back long enough for Akama to finish the other one. Kujo was deeply worried about whether he was capable of doing this. Akama reassured him that it wouldn't be difficult. He reminded Kujo of the last time he were attacked, how easily the creatures had been pinned down. They were as light as they looked. All Kujo needed to do was not falter. He swallowed his fear and squeezed harder. The monster stank, its skin clammy and sticky, but Kujo refused to let go. If he kept this up, he could kill it. But then he hesitated. Was he really about to kill something with his bare hands? In that moment of hesitation, he saw the monster's face twist strangely, almost like it was crying. Kujo's grip loosened. The creature broke free, slammed its head backward into his face, and knocked out one of his teeth. Their positions were instantly reversed. The monster lifted a sharp rock, preparing to stab him. Akama rushed over and kicked the monster at the base of its skull. The blow was so strong that blood burst from its orifices. It collapsed dead on top of Kujo. Kujo shoved the corpse aside. As both of them caught their breath, Akama asked why he hesitated because he almost died. Kujo apologized, admitting the weight of taking a life was been too much for him. Akama said that maybe it was kindness, but that if Kujo held on to naive hesitation, he would only be a burden to him. Kujo's expression hardened, and he suddenly lunged, not at Akama, but at another monster creeping up behind him. He tackled it, pinning it down. Akama grabbed another sharp rock and drove it into the monster's throat. After it stopped moving, Kujo collapsed in tears, not from grief, but because they survived. Akama offered him a hand and apologized, taking back what he said earlier. Kujo accepted it, agreeing that Akama had been right. Now, they knew the monsters could be defeated. It was a small step forward in conquering the mountain. Akama then suggested taking clothes from the crucified corpses. Kujo hesitated, fearing retribution from disturbing the dead, but Akama had no intention of staying naked. As he reached for the clothes, something burst out of the ground. A creature with an enormous head surfaced, its face a cluster of teeth and torn limbs. It lunged and bit into Akama's lower body. Before Kujo could react, the monster was already gnawing through him. Blood splattered across Kujo's face. He screamed and ran as the monster finished its meal. Once it noticed him fleeing, it dropped to all fours and tried to chase him. Fortunately, it wasn't fast. Then the creature spat something. It struck Kujo's back and knocked him to the ground. It was Akama's head. Kujo screamed. The creature spat again, this time Akama's arm, hitting Kujo in the back of the head and paralyzing him. The monster pounced and devoured him next. Everything went dark. That was why Kujo felt uneasy about the place. The ground near the crucified bodies was unusually smooth, and they only crucified clothed individuals, as if using them as bait for an ambush. The monsters were not only terrifying, they were also cunning. Then sensation returned to his limbs. He could breathe again. He clawed upward and dug himself out of the earth, emerging once more in the field of flowers. Kujo let out a shaky sigh of relief, then immediately cursed himself for it. He had just died again. There's nothing to be relieved about that. Kujo wondered how many times he would die, over and over, just to reach the peak of the mountain. Then someone screamed, catching Kujo's attention. Kujo turned and saw two more people nearby, a man and a woman. The man was furious, yelling about being deceived by the guide for not mentioning the monsters. He demanded that Tomoria show herself so he could kill her. Tomoria appeared, unimpressed. She reminded them that she had warned them earlier and didn't recommend it, but they had insisted anyway. The man was still angry and snapped at her, as if he would ever accept that excuse. Tomoria sighed and called him spoiled. She explained that death was a fate shared by all living things, and they were foolish to think they could overturn it so easily. This challenge, she said, was a blessing, an opportunity for those who defied death to grasp hope. The angry man snapped. He shoved Tomoria to the ground and grabbed her breast. He planned to assault her before killing her. Kujo stepped forward to intervene, but in an instant, half of the man's arm flew through the air, severed cleanly. He collapsed, screaming. Tomoria rose to her feet, a massive scythe materializing in her hands, and warned him coldly not to cause any further mischief. Everyone was stunned by what had happened. The maimed man, furious rather than afraid, staggered to his feet and charged at Tomoria again. With a single fluid motion, she severed his remaining arm. It landed beside the young woman, who screamed and broke down in tears. Tomoria asked the man if he still wished to fool around. Her tone alone made him shriek in terror. Unable to bear any more, the girl ran. She sprinted toward the shore, desperate to escape this place and die a normal death. She dove into the sea, but instead of floating, she sank straight down. At the bottom, she found the water choked with the corpses of monsters. Her scream echoed beneath the surface. Kujo saw that she wasn't resurfacing and tried to help, but Tomoria stopped him. She explained that anyone who jumped in would sink as well. No one could leave without a boat. The man, shaking and bleeding, asked Tomoria what this place was and why she was doing this to them. She answered coldly that it was purification, a cleansing of impure souls like his. The man demanded to know what she meant by impure, but Tomoria merely replied that he would understand soon enough. Then she pressed the blade of her scythe against his neck and told him to move along unless he preferred to die here. If he died, she added, his arms would return in his next body. Screaming, the man fled. Tomoria then turned to Kujo and asked what he intended to do, terrifying him. There was no turning back. Refusing the challenge wasn't an option, not with his daughter's life on the line. Forcing down his fear, Kujo ran toward the mountain. As he fled, Tomoria smiled faintly and said that his decision was a good one. Kujo soon found himself back in the forest. He hid behind a tree, watching as a lone humanoid monster blocked the path, staring upward at something. Kujo debated whether to sneak behind it and choke it out, but that tactic had only worked with Akama's help. And the huge creature from before might still be lurking nearby. With no way to confront it, he decided to take a detour. But as he stepped away, a twig snapped under his foot. He was fucked. He slowly turned his head, checking if the monster had noticed him, only to find it dead staring right back at him. Kujo ran, screaming. The monster chased him with a crude spear, and Kujo's foot snagged on a tree root. He yanked desperately, but he couldn't free himself. The monster loomed over him, spear raised. Kujo's heart broke. No matter how many times he respawned, he would never reach the peak. It was impossible. When all hope seemed lost, a cleaver struck the monster's neck, and grabbed its head and brutally decapitated it. It was done by another monster. But this one was different. It smiled at Kujo and spoke, but its words were incoherent. Panicking, Kujo scrambled backward. Then a voice called down from above. A small girl perched in a tree told him to calm down. She dropped lightly to the ground, interpreted the creature's garbled speech. It had simply been asking if he was all right. Kujo was confused. How could a little girl be here? Before he could ask, the face of the sane-looking humanoid monster moved close to his. Kujo froze in terror. The girl quickly assured the creature, whom she called Gramps, that Kujo wasn't hurt. The monster relaxed and walked away. Kujo remained stunned. That thing had just saved him. He wondered if that was a human. The little girl called him lucky because Gramps happened to find him. Kujo asked if the monster was really her grandfather, but she immediately denied it, confusing him even more. Gramps retrieved a makeshift backpack and slung it over his shoulder. It seemed they were leaving. The girl said her goodbyes, but Kujo called out to them and decided to follow. As they hiked, Kujo watched the two in disbelief. They moved with ease, barely breathing heavily, while he struggled to keep up. Their makeshift clothes and tools suggested they had real survival experience, maybe from when they were alive. Kujo couldn't help thinking about how someone so young ended up in a place like this. Both she and he had almost no chance of returning to life. The girl eventually spoke, her tone flat, conveying that there was no reason for him to continue following them. Kujo apologized, saying he didn't have the nerves to be alone in this place, and that he was worried about her, since the area was full of monsters. But the girl replied that she was already used to it. This shocked him. He immediately asked how old she was. She shot him a glare and replied that she was around 16 or 17. Kujo was taken aback. Her manner was composed, but she looked like an elementary schooler to him, so much so that he wondered if she was joking or dodging the question. She continued, telling him that if he wanted to return to life, it was better not to follow them. Kujo agreed, assuming she also wanted to be revived and that he would only get in the way. He apologized and thanked them for saving him, then turned to leave. The girl looked back and asked if he was a newcomer, since he wasn't stained yet. Kujo asked what she meant, but before she could answer, Gramps suddenly tensed up. He had sensed danger. A monster similar to the previous one appeared ahead, devouring a human corpse, until it noticed them. Its legs were unnaturally large, allowing it to sprint toward them at frightening speed. Kujo shouted for everyone to run, but the girl instead stepped forward with a spear in her hand. Using a simple throwing tool, she launched it with ease. The spear pierced the monster's eye, killing it instantly. Kujo couldn't believe what he was seeing. A little girl had taken down that monster effortlessly. Their clothes, their tools, their composure, these two were far too accustomed to this world. To confirm his growing suspicion, Kujo asked how long they had been here. The girl, still wary of him, asked what he planned to do with the information. Kujo just begged her to tell him. She answered that she had arrived here at the age of 6 and had stopped counting the years, though she guessed it had been around a decade. She added that Gramps had been here even longer. Kujo was shaken. He had thought the earlier group were the only ones here. But this was the afterlife. Of course, others were sent here long before them. If 10 years had passed since they arrived here, there should have been so many people on the island, and yet not a single one had reached the peak. Panic began to rise in him, but he forced himself to stop. Thinking negatively wouldn't help him survive. Besides, it wasn't all bad. He had barely even started exploring this world. In fact, he was lucky. If he could learn from these two, maybe he had a chance of reaching the peak. A voice suddenly called out for help. It was the human the monster had been eating earlier. He was still alive. When they reached him, it was already too late. He was missing a chunk of flesh, and his right arm was mangled beyond saving. Kujo asked if the two knew how to treat him. The girl simply walked forward and stabbed the dying man in the throat, ending his suffering. The man tried to speak, releasing only a strangled gurgle before falling still. Kujo instinctively stopped her, demanding to know why she had done something so cruel. Her expression darkened. With injuries like those, she explained, the man would not have survived long anyway. And besides, everyone revived eventually. Before Kujo could process her reasoning, she crouched beside the corpse and began consuming parts of it for sustenance. The sight made Kujo stagger back in horror, his stomach revolting until he collapsed to the ground and vomited. She only glanced at him, calmly stating that this world provided neither food nor water. The only option you have is the human bodies here. At her signal, Gramps began breaking down the corpse with efficiency. Kujo could only claw at his face in disbelief, forced to watch as they reduced the remains into manageable portions. Once finished, the two resumed their journey, leaving Kujo frozen, traumatized, and unable to follow. He remembered her earlier explanation. The bodies in this world were not true flesh, but soul vessels. The flowers at the starting point grew bodies beneath the soil, giving form to any soul that arrived here. In a way, these bodies were closer to vegetables than meat. But once a soul inhabited them, they functioned like human bodies. They felt pain, hunger, and could be destroyed and regenerated over and over. And because they mimicked human structure, they needed the same thing to sustain themselves, other bodies like theirs. Even knowing this, Kujo struggled to accept it. The man had been alive moments earlier. Yet if he wanted any chance of returning to life, he needed to stay close to the two who understood this world. Forcing himself to stand, he pushed through his fear and continued after them. While moving through the forest, he tripped over exposed roots. His stomach growled at the memory of the corpse, and he struck his abdomen in frustration, disgusted by his own rising hunger. By nightfall, the girl and Gramps had set up a small fire, calmly eating their share of the meat. Kujo collapsed near them, relieved simply to have caught up. He slumped against a tree, too exhausted to speak. Gramps rose, filled a bowl from their supply, and approached him. He offered it wordlessly. Inside were pieces of flesh and blood, food in this world's sense. Kujo stared in disbelief. The girl told Gramps that giving it to Kujo would be a waste. She then turned to him and told him to eat it, saying it was valuable. If Kujo wanted to survive, he needed to adapt and eat it, but he trembles and can't bring himself to eat it. The girl tossed a makeshift weapon at his feet and told him coldly that if he wished to climb toward the peak, eating it was his only option. If he couldn't do it, he could choose a different path, one where he kept dying, whether by monsters or by his own hand, because death would reset his hunger and spare him from ever needing to eat again. Kujo picked up the cleaver and stared at it for a long, empty moment. He then told the girl that he had a daughter in high school, around the same age as the girl in front of him, and the man who killed him would kill her too. That was why he had to return to life, no matter how many times he died here. Even if his daughter might somehow survive without him, he still needed to come back to life because he had made a promise to protect her. Kujo lifted the bowl to his lips. The stench alone nearly made him gag, but he forced the liquid into his mouth. It was thick, cold, and tasted like soil, just as the girl had said. More like a vegetable than flesh. Kujo wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He would not give up. Not while his daughter was still in danger. Whatever this place demanded of him, whatever it required, he would endure it. He bent forward and threw up, making him lose all the aura he had gained just moments ago. From a short distance away, the girl's expression softened. Kujo had reminded her of her father. After they finished eating, the two finally introduced themselves. The old humanoid monster was named Tetsuhachi, and the girl called herself Nero. Kujo, speaking without thinking, referred to her as Little Nero, which immediately irritated her. Nero tossed him a piece of leather. Kujo asked what it was for, and she told him that if he planned on following them around, he should at least make a loincloth to cover himself. Kujo flushed with embarrassment and picked up the material, only to drop it the moment he realized it was human skin, the stitches made from hair. Nero clicked her tongue and reminded him that it wasn't real human flesh, and that he needed to stop panicking over every tiny thing because it was getting annoying. Kujo forced himself to pick the leather and needle back up, repeating in his mind that it was more vegetable than meat. He managed to craft a crude loincloth. Nero immediately roasted him for how poorly it was made. Kujo offered to redo it, but before he could start, Tetsu stepped in front of him, silently took the leather and began remaking it himself. Nero explained that Tetsu hated wasting materials. It was practically ingrained in him. When Tetsu handed the finished product back, the difference was staggering. Kujo thanked him, but Tetsu didn't respond. Assuming he hadn't heard, Kujo repeated himself, but Tetsu continued staring blankly into the fire. Kujo concluded the old man must dislike him for being a burden and apologized for causing trouble, since the two of them were probably also trying to climb the mountain and revive. Nero sighed and told him he got it completely wrong. Tetsu wasn't ignoring him. And more importantly, they weren't trying to come back to life at all. Kujo froze. Nero explained that this was the reason she'd told him earlier that following them was pointless. They weren't aiming for the peak. They weren't trying to revive. Kujo asked why they were here then. Nero shrugged. They were here for adventure. Tetsu had been an adventurer when he was alive, traveling across the world until he died in an accident mid-journey. Because he died before fulfilling his wanderlust, the regret clung to him. And this world, the afterlife mountain with its dangers and mysteries, was even harsher and more unknown than anything in the living world. For someone like him, this place was a paradise. He would rather keep exploring forever than return to life. Nero was simply tagging along. Their unnatural skill in surviving this hellish world suddenly made sense. Even so, Kujo muttered, too loudly, that it wasn't normal to choose this place over life. He apologized immediately, but Nero brushed it off. She explained that Tetsu was already paying the price for staying in this world too long. He was on the verge of becoming something called an end human. Kujo asked what that meant, but before Nero could answer, she tensed. She told him they had lingered too long. If they didn't leave now, they would be surrounded. The monsters that had killed Kujo before, the things that stalked the mountain, were all end humans. And then, 4 of them appeared, perched on branches overhead, roaring down at them. For the first time, Tetsu stirred. He rose to his feet, grabbed his cleaver, and let out a howl in answer. While Kujo and Nero ran, Tetsu stayed behind to face all the end humans alone. In an instant, Tetsu decapitated one of the end humans. Kujo asked why Tetsu stayed behind. Nero explained that as someone gets closer to becoming an end human, their ability to make rational decisions slowly erodes. Tetsu, already on the brink, would often charge into danger without thought, just like now. Nero couldn't throw her spear to help because Tetsu was too close to the enemy, and Kujo could only watch. The fight was hopelessly unfair, 1 against 3. One end human knocked Tetsu's weapon aside, and another lunged at him from behind, jaws opening to tear into his neck. Tetsu twisted around, bit through her hand, tearing it apart, then smashed his elbow into her face with enough force to crack bone. He grabbed the one in front of him, slammed it to the ground, and began ripping its face apart. Its screams echoed through the forest, and then he crushed its throat beneath his heel, silencing it. The wounded end human stared at him in terror, but Tetsu pounced, punched her face again and again, blood spraying everywhere. Tetsu only stopped when the end human finally stopped moving. Kujo stared in horror. Nero only let out a long, burdened sigh. Kujo finally understood what he was looking at. These monsters, these end humans, were once people, and Tetsu was on the verge of becoming one of them. he asked Nero to confirm it. Nero told him that those monsters were the end result. They were the humans who came here. The humans who arrive in this place gradually lose their minds as they continue to be exposed to hell. They cry, feel distressed, and eventually become lethargic until they turn completely empty. A human on the verge of becoming empty, with nothing left but their bare instincts. That's what an end human is. Kujo felt terrified and asked Nero if this would happen to everyone. Nero replied that it would, in just a few months at the earliest. Tetsu lasted a long time because he was enjoying this world, but even so, his end was near. Kujo couldn't believe there was an actual time limit here. If he doesn't come back to life before then, he won't be able to save you, and he'll end up as one of those monsters. Tetsu stood over the fallen female end human. Breathing hard, he slowly opens its legs. Kujo and Nero both froze in horror, unable to process what they were seeing. Nero yelled for him to stop and told Tetsu that if he went any further, he would no longer be human. She begged him to stop, and Tetsu froze before slowly getting up from the corpse. Nero burst into tears and ran off. Kujo followed her, taking one last glance at Tetsu. Tetsu looked devastated by what he had almost done. Nero stopped by a tree and collapsed to her knees, crying. Kujo tried to say something, but the words wouldn't leave his mouth. Nero told him to leave her alone, but seeing her like that, Kujo couldn't bring himself to walk away. Instead, he sat down about 10 feet away from her. Nero asked if he didn't hear her, but Kujo replied that he did. He just wanted to sit there to clear his head too. Nero called him annoying, which Kujo was used to since his daughter called him annoying all the time. Kujo then asked why she kept following Tetsu. She had said earlier that they weren't family and that she was just following him. After what happened earlier, she could be the one in danger next. Kujo was simply worried. Nero explained that she had been just like Kujo when she first arrived here, completely confused with no idea what to do. Tetsu was the one who saved her when she was totally helpless, and from that moment on, she just followed him. She learned everything from him: how to live, how to create tools, how to fight. He taught her everything. Tetsu treated her as if she were his own daughter. Kujo understood, but remembering what he saw earlier, he asked if she really intended to stay with him. Nero answered immediately, she would. She would stay with him until the end. Later that night, while the three of them lay on the ground, the two were asleep while Kujo stared upward, wide awake and thinking. He tried to imagine himself in Nero's shoes, being young, a little child, alone in a place like this. Just the thought gave him chills. She must have been so scared and lonely. Then someone appeared and saved her in her moment of despair. It was no surprise she couldn't separate herself from Tetsu. If there was a way for Tetsu to avoid becoming an end human, it was to reach the peak. But if that happened, Nero would be left alone, and Kujo still wouldn't be able to save you. There was nothing he could do, nothing Kujo could change. Tetsu then slowly got up and began crawling toward Nero as she slept, breathing heavily and drooling, like he was preparing to eat her. Tetsu lost his mind once again. Nero was awake. She gripped her weapon tightly, but Tetsu regained consciousness. His whole body trembled as he realized what he had been about to do to her. Instead of attacking, he slowly placed his hand on her head and gently caressed it. The gesture shocked Kujo and made Nero's expression sink with sadness. Then Tetsu threw his head back and howled into the night. Nero then went back to sleep. As the night passed, Nero was the first to wake. The moment she sat up, she noticed Tetsu was nowhere in sight. Only his backpack remained. Nero and Kujo immediately ran off to search for him. Nero screamed his name, calling out desperately. Kujo told her to calm down, insisting that if she yelled like that, the end humans would find them. But Nero was in full panic. Tetsu never went anywhere without his tools. If he left them behind, she feared he had lost his mind again. She shook with terror at the thought that, if they were separated now, they might never see each other again. She had to find him. Kujo looked down and told her she had the wrong idea. He believed Tetsu made the decision to leave her, so he wouldn't hurt her once he turned into an end human. But Nero refused to believe that. They had talked before about what they would do when the time finally came. Becoming an end human was inevitable in this world. They had seen it countless times. That was why they promised to stay together until the end. Kujo replied that even if Tetsu had resolved that before, once the moment arrived, he would still choose to protect her, no matter the cost. Tetsu probably thought of Nero like his own daughter, and the idea of hurting her must have been unbearably terrifying. Nero screamed at him to shut up. He had only met them recently. Why was he talking like he knew him? But Kujo persisted, saying that staying together now would only bring her more pain, and she needed to try understanding why Tetsu left. Nero covered her ears and ran, refusing to listen. Kujo watched her go, sadness in his eyes. As Nero ran, memories of Tetsu flooded her mind. She began to panic. What was she supposed to do if Tetsu was really gone? But before she could think further, a large stone slammed into her head, knocking her to the ground. She looked back weakly. It was an end human. Its right arm was grotesquely enlarged, holding another stone, ready to throw. Nero was moments from passing out, but she forced herself to stay conscious. She refused to die, not before seeing Tetsu again. Just as the end human was about to finish her, Kujo crashed into it, tackling it to the ground. He shouted for Nero to run while he struggled to pin the creature down, but once he had it held, he realized he had no idea what to do next. The end human grabbed him by the neck and began to choke him. Kujo couldn't afford to die, not with Nero still there. He had to do something. While he was being choked, Kujo raised the heel of his foot and slammed it into the end human's face. The impact loosened its grip, allowing him to escape. He recovered quickly and lunged at it, but the creature threw a stone that nearly hit him in the face. It struck the tree behind him with such force that it left a deep dent. If it had hit him, he would surely have died. The end human picked up another rock. Kujo had no choice but to take cover behind the tree. Closing the distance was impossible, and even if he managed it, he didn't know how to finish it. All he could remember was a rear choke from Akama, but that only worked if he caught it by surprise. He considered throwing a rock back, but then he heard Nero's weak voice instruct him. After throwing, he should close the distance with a weapon. A branch from the tree could be used. These trees were hard, and even a thin branch could be turned into a spear if torn off. As the end human reloaded, Kujo ran toward the tree and tried to break a branch, but it was too tough. The creature launched its rock just as he let go, and the stone struck the branch, breaking it off. Nero shouted for him to stab it in the heart. Kujo charged, branch in hand, but at the last moment, he hesitated. He remembered that these monsters had once been human. He thrust the branch too late, and the inhuman blocked its heart. Their eyes met, and Kujo froze in terror. Nero yelled at him to move, but it was too late. The end human punched him in the face, knocking him to the ground, then slammed his arm, breaking it instantly. Kujo screamed in agony. He kept failing, again and again. Even though Akama had told him to kill and the humans inside were gone, Kujo still couldn't bring himself to kill. The end human grabbed his hair and sank its teeth toward his neck, making him scream again. Just as Kujo thought all was lost, Nero recovered and drove her weapon into its back. Shocked, Kujo watched as she shouted at him to grab his weapon. The end human rose again, forcing Nero to leap onto its back to hold it down. She screamed at Kujo, warning him that if he wanted to save his daughter, he had to kill it. Before he could act, the end human slammed Nero into the ground so hard that she bounced, sending Kujo into a panic. Kujo watched as Nero's body went limp, blood seeping out. All he could do was cry and blame himself. The end human drooled as it approached her motionless form. Gritting his teeth, Kujo grabbed his weapon and charged. He stabbed it in the eye and tackled it to the ground. The creature screamed in agony, but Kujo didn't stop. He pulled the branch out of its eye and stabbed again and again, shouting for it not to move. He continued until the end human was dead, its body riddled with holes. Exhausted and crying, Kujo dropped the branch and knelt beside Nero. He apologized over and over, blaming himself. Tears streamed down his face until he heard a weak voice. He called her name frantically, unsure if she was alive. There was no immediate response, and he feared he had imagined it, but he pressed on, tending to her head to stop the bleeding. Remembering Tetsu's backpack, he realized it might contain something to help her. They had left it behind, meaning he would have to go back. But leaving Nero exposed was dangerous. Other end humans could be nearby. Ignoring the pain from his broken arm, Kujo lifted her, enduring every second. He whispered apologies and urged her to hold on, promising that he wouldn't let her die, no matter what. Arriving at the backpack, Kujo hurriedly searched for anything that could help, but all he found were tools. There was nothing useful. He didn't know what to do next. Suddenly, Nero spoke weakly. She told Kujo that he was panicking too much and that he should calm down a little. This shocked Kujo, and he told her how glad he was that she was still alive. Nero then opened up, saying that it had been a long time since she had last been hugged. The last time was when she died. She had been hit by a car, and just like Kujo now, her father had been panicking, desperately running while holding her during her final moments. Nero thanked Kujo because she remembered many things she had tried not to think about. Kujo made her want to see her father again. All Kujo could do was apologize. He tried to motivate her, telling her that if she wanted to see her father, she needed to recover quickly and aim for the peak. He told her to wait there while he went to find something to treat her wounds. Nero stopped him and said it wasn't necessary. This shocked Kujo. Since her head injury looked extremely serious, they at least had to stop the bleeding. Nero told him not to worry, since she couldn't feel any of her limbs anymore. She was done for. Kujo collapsed to his knees. Nero told him that she planned to get revived and look for Tetsu. Kujo told her once again that Tetsu was nearing his end, but Nero replied that Tetsu was the one who saved her when she first came to this world. She had been following him ever since. She didn't know what she was supposed to do without him. There was nothing left to live for in this world. Kujo asked her why she didn't aim for the peak, since she wanted to see her father. Nero said she did want to see him. Her father always spoiled her, and the dad she loved was kinder than anyone. But it was impossible now. Defeating all the end humans and reaching the peak with the body of a 6-year-old was unrealistic. Besides, she had already been in this world for 10 years. She was no longer the person she once was. She couldn't return to her innocent days. She couldn't return to her happy family. Kujo couldn't reply anymore. He simply began to cry. Then Nero asked him for one final favor. She asked Kujo to kill her. Kujo was shaken. All he could do was ask what she was saying, because there was no way he could do such a thing. Nero told him it was the only option. If he refused, all she could do was bite off her own tongue. She said she would rather have an easier death. She asked Kujo to sever her carotid artery with a stone knife. Once again, Kujo told her he couldn't do it. Nero pleaded with him. She wanted to come back to life as soon as possible, so she could go look for Tetsu. Kujo asked why she was so desperate to find him. Nero told him that she had spent 10 years with Tetsu. She had lived with him longer than she had lived with her parents. To her, Tetsu was already family. And also she didn't want to be alone. Kujo could only cry. He told her he couldn't do it. He told Nero not to give up, that he would stay with her until she recovered and protect her from the end humans. But Nero shook her head. She told him that she wanted him to reach the peak. She gave him one last piece of advice, to act only for himself and throw away his kindness. There was someone he wanted to save no matter what, and stopping here would only prevent him from doing so. Kujo remembered his final moments in his previous life, his daughter in danger. He gritted his teeth and reached for the stone knife staring at its edge. Nero thanked him. She told Kujo that all the tools in the backpack were his now. She even told him to use her corpse as food. Nero hopes he can save his daughter. All Kujo could say was, "I'm sorry." Nero smiled at him. With a quick slash, Kujo ended her life painlessly. He buried her afterward, refusing to follow her advice about using her body as food. Kujo wailed, asking the world what it wanted from them. He sat beside her grave for a long time, reflecting on everything Nero had said. He remembered his daughter. He wanted to see her again. So he stood up, took the backpack, and decided to move forward before he lost himself completely. As Kujo walked away, he failed to notice that, from far away, someone had been watching his every move. As Kujo continued his journey, his broken arm began to throb. Remembering everything he had already endured, he pushed through the pain and kept moving forward. Suddenly, something came running toward him. When Kujo looked back, he saw another human screaming for help, desperately fleeing from an end human that was right behind him. Kujo immediately pulled the cleaver from his backpack and turned to face it, The end-human lunged, slamming into him and knocking him to the ground. Kujo struggled. He could only use one arm. Seeing this, the other human acted. He threw his bag at the end-human, knocking it off Kujo. Kujo seized the opening. He pinned the creature's neck to the ground with his cleaver, then forced his broken arm down despite the searing pain. With one final motion, he decapitated the end-human. The other man rushed over, thanking Kujo repeatedly and apologizing for dragging him into danger. Kujo replied that he was just relieved nothing worse had happened. He said his goodbyes and turned to leave. As Kujo turned to leave, the man hurried after him, trying to stop him. Before he could take more than a few steps, his strength gave out and he collapsed to the ground. His leg had been badly injured. He couldn't walk. Kujo helped him sit up, fashioned a wooden splint for his calf, and supported him as they moved together. The man apologized again, ashamed to ask for help. Kujo shook his head and decided he couldn't leave him like that. The man introduced himself as Onodera. Kujo gave his own name in return. Onodera explained that he hadn't meant to involve Kujo with an end-human. He had spotted Kujo earlier and decided to observe from a distance, not realizing one had been following him. He then asked if there was anything he could do to repay Kujo. Kujo thought for a moment before replying. He asked if there was somewhere safe nearby where he could drop Onodera off. He just wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. Onodera said he would be fine after a short climb ahead. This surprised Kujo. He asked if Onodera was familiar with the area. Onodera admitted that he was, but quickly changed the subject. He said he was amazed by how Kujo fought the end-human and noted how many tools he carried. He asked how long Kujo had been in this world. Kujo replied that the tools had only been given to him recently, and that he had arrived just a few days ago. Onodera was shocked. If Kujo could kill an end-human in only a few days, he must be strong. Kujo denied it. He said he simply didn't want anyone else to get hurt because of his mistakes. After hearing this, Onodera finally revealed the truth. There was a village nearby, a settlement up ahead, made up of people like him. People who had given up on returning to life. Onodera had arrived in this world a year ago. Lacking both strength and courage, he failed to kill any end-humans and soon gave up. That was when he found the village, people like him, helping one another survive. He told Kujo this because he believed Kujo wouldn't harm them, and because he owed Kujo a debt for saving his life. Onodera told him he was welcome to rest in their village. Kujo respectfully declined. He said he didn't have time to stay. Onodera sighed and told him that he had been watching the mountain for an entire year. He hadn't seen any signs that someone had reached the peak. Then he quietly warned Kujo that his heart looked like it was about to break, and that approaching the mountain in that state was dangerous. Onodera warned him that if his heart broke in this world, it would truly be the end. Kujo wavered at those words. At that moment, the village finally came into view. It was hidden within a cave-like structure carved into the mountain itself. Upon arriving at the wooden gate, Kujo noticed liquid flowing inside the village grounds. He wondered if it was drinkable and looked to Onodera for confirmation. Unfortunately, it was not water. The substance resembled kerosene or gasoline, odorless and clear like water. The villagers called it firewater, and it was widely used as fuel throughout the settlement. Onodera shared his hypothesis that the firewater might be the result of accumulated corpses over time, similar to how fossil fuels were formed. He warned Kujo to be careful around it, as consuming too much firewater was extremely dangerous. As they reached the gate, two men stationed there greeted Onodera warmly, clearly relieved to see him return. They also noticed Kujo and assumed he was a new ally. Kujo tried to deny this, but the guards brushed it off casually, telling him to relax and not worry about labels. The two guards introduced themselves as Kuroda and Tani, and Kujo followed suit. The wooden gate was opened, allowing them inside. What Kujo saw beyond it left him stunned. The interior of the village resembled a functioning civilization. There were houses, people working, and even some engaged in leisure activities. It was far more developed than anything Kujo had imagined possible in this world. Onodera explained that everyone in the village played a role. Some created necessities such as tableware, others crafted weapons to fight the end humans. There were people dedicated to entertainment and those with physical strength. like Kuroda and Tani, served as protectors. By working together, they had managed to bring life closer to normal. Onodera suggested that they meet Jinbo first before continuing their conversation. Jinbo was the organizer of the village and the one responsible for building it. Onodera warned Kujo that Jinbo's presence could be intimidating at first, but reassured him that he was a dependable man who always prioritized the lives of others. They soon reached Jinbo. He was sharpening a stone knife when he noticed their presence. His sharp glare startled Kujo, but it quickly softened into a welcoming expression. Jinbo acknowledged Onodera's return and noticed that he had brought someone new with him. Kujo realized that he was not the only newcomer in the village. Jinbo stood up and greeted them, expressing how reassuring it was to have more allies. Kujo observed that Jinbo was tall and powerfully built, his body shaped by constant labor. Jinbo then turned his attention to Kujo, gauging his intentions. Before Kujo could answer, Onodera explained that Kujo had not yet decided whether to stay and was only planning to rest briefly. Jinbo seemed unconcerned and motioned for Kujo to follow him, hinting that he had something prepared. Onodera told Kujo to go ahead while he took a seat on a nearby tree stump. From storage, Jinbo retrieved a jacket and handed it to Kujo. The gesture surprised him. Jinbo explained that the cold was dangerous without proper clothing and that the jacket had been found earlier, so he wanted Kujo to have it. Kujo tried to refuse, knowing how precious clothing was in this world and believing he didn't deserve it as a non-resident. Jinbo dismissed his hesitation and explained one of the village's core principles: mutual support. The village existed to fulfill the basic necessities of life: food, clothing, and shelter. When even one of these was missing, the heart began to wear down. Once the heart broke, the transformation into an end human would accelerate. To prevent such tragedies, the villagers worked together to make life fulfilling again. Helping others, Jinbo believed, also fulfilled one's own heart. In a world like this, remaining human was more important than anything else. For that reason, Jinbo urged Kujo to accept the jacket. Kujo finally did, expressing his gratitude. As he put it on, he was surprised by how warm it felt. He found it hard to believe that people like Jinbo and Onodera could exist in such a cruel world. For a brief moment, Kujo considered staying in the village until his injuries healed, but the thought vanished just as quickly. He still had to save his daughter. Jinbo then suggested that, since they had a guest, they should hold a welcoming party. Kujo felt uneasy and tried to decline, but Jinbo waved off his concern, explaining that the gathering would be shared with everyone anyway. Kujo began to wonder what Jinbo meant by that. As Jinbo opened a nearby door, he told Kujo to sit tight while he prepared it. Waiting inside was a woman, gagged and restrained on a table, as Jinbo told them that a fresh woman would be their dinner for tonight. That was why Jinbo had been sharpening a knife earlier. He had been preparing to butcher her. This realization shocked Kujo, and he asked Jinbo what he was talking about, since the girl was still alive. Jinbo replied bluntly that there were fewer edible parts on a dead body. Kujo insisted that she was still alive and well, questioning how Jinbo could treat her as food. Jinbo instead turned to Onodera and asked what this meant. Onodera explained that Kujo had only arrived in this world a few days ago. The atmosphere around Jinbo immediately changed, and he coldly remarked that Onodera should only bring people who were useful. Without warning, Jinbo punched Kujo in the stomach, forcing him to his knees. He then put Kujo in a rear chokehold and told Onodera that Kujo would be better off as meat for the village. Before Kujo lost consciousness, Onodera stepped in and stopped Jinbo, saying it was too early to judge Kujo as useless. He told Jinbo that he had witnessed Kujo killing both a child and an end human. This shocked Jinbo. He released the chokehold but instead pinned Kujo to the ground, demanding to know if Onodera was telling the truth. Onodera confirmed it, adding that he had been impressed by how Kujo took down the end human assigned to him. To them, anyone who could fight was valuable. Kujo questioned what Onodera was talking about, and then noticed that Onodera had been faking his leg injury all along. Onodera apologized and explained that he had been observing Kujo ever since Nero was attacked by an end human. He had been trying to determine whether Kujo would be a valuable asset to the settlement. Jinbo then explained their situation. Humans were the only food source left in this world. Even when they found corpses, they were usually already partially devoured by end humans, making them insufficient to keep the village alive. In order to survive, they had to capture living humans and eat them. It was the most straightforward approach. Jinbo added that he did not take pleasure in doing this, which was why he constantly improved his tools and techniques to minimize pain. He asked Kujo if he understood what he was saying. Kujo answered that he absolutely did not. Jinbo turned to Onodera and remarked that it was too soon for Kujo to understand their reality, and that it would be easier to turn him into meat than go through the trouble of recruiting him. Kujo demanded to know how Jinbo's heart did not hurt after frightening the woman like that. Jinbo countered by asking whether Kujo was suggesting they should simply starve to death and quickly become end humans. Kujo denied that, but Jinbo cut him off, saying Kujo understood nothing. He doesn't understand how they feel about living here. They had once been just like him, aiming for the peak in hopes of returning to life. Again and again they had tried, but not a single person had ever managed to set foot on the mountain at the center. No matter how hard they tried, it was impossible. Dying repeatedly would only turn them into end humans, which was why they had no choice but to settle down there. Jinbo told Kujo that he did not need to understand now. He would understand in time. When that moment came, they would recruit him into the village. For now, he needed to behave himself and be a food that will fill their stomachs. Onodera intervened once more, urging Jinbo not to judge too hastily. He pointed out that 2 of their guardians had recently become end humans, leaving the village short on fighters. Kuroda and Tani alone would not be enough to handle an emergency. Jinbo remained skeptical, but Onodera argued that Kujo's heart was already exhausted and that he would try to convince him somehow. He asked Jinbo to put the idea of turning Kujo into food on hold for the time being. Jinbo finally agreed. He instructed Onodera to tie Kujo up while he butchered the woman on the table. Kujo begged him to stop, but Jinbo was already standing over her with the knife in hand. He aimed it at her neck and offered a brief apology. Despite his broken arm, Kujo forced himself through Onodera's restraint and charged at Jinbo, only to be struck by Jinbo's fist and sent crashing to the floor. Jinbo stated once again that not eating was not an option. Kujo responded that this contradicted Jinbo's own claim of being human, because how could this possibly be considered human? For the first time, Jinbo had no answer. After a moment, Jinbo reconsidered. If Kujo was so insistent, then he would be given a chance to prove his usefulness to the village. If he wished to save the woman, he would need to capture someone else to take her place. Kujo was dragged deeper into the cave by Kuroda and Tani. He struggled and pleaded with them, but they shoved him mercilessly into a wooden cage. Onodera watched from nearby and told Kujo that he would have preferred a peaceful resolution, but it was unfortunate that things had turned out this way. Kujo's anger boiled over because he had been tricked. Onodera only apologized, explaining that when he was alive, he had been an actor and deceiving people had been part of his job. Desperate, Kujo once again begged them to release both him and the woman. He could not remain in one place. He had to save his daughter. Onodera shook his head and told him it was futile. Just as Jinbo had said earlier, no one had ever managed to set foot on the central mountain. Even someone like Jinbo stopped at the foot of the mountain. Everyone who had reached that far had said the same thing. I don't want to get close to it ever again. Onodera admitted that he did not know the exact details, since he had never been there himself, but he suspected something terrifying awaited those who tried. It was safer for Kujo to remain in the village than to die repeatedly at the mountain's foot. Despite everything, Onodera thought highly of Kujo. He had proven capable of defeating end humans, and in Onodera's eyes, he had the qualities of a good man. Before leaving, Onodera told Kujo he would give him time to think. If his answer was no, both he and the woman would become food. Kujo screamed for Onodera to return, only to be silenced by another voice warning him to stop, because the others might start making a fuss too. Looking around, Kujo saw other cages, each holding prisoners begging to be freed. When one of the guards noticed a prisoner had died, they quickly removed the body, placing it on a table to drain its blood and dismember it while it was still fresh. Kujo watched in horror as they carved up the corpse. He realized he needed to escape immediately. Beside his cage, the woman began to wake up. She looked around in confusion, asking where she was. Kujo rushed to check if she was okay, but the girl suddenly screamed, begging him not to kill her. Kujo tried to calm her, assuring her that she was not in danger for the time being and urging her to relax. Yet she remained terrified, pleading desperately for the help of her boyfriend. It was then that Kujo recognized her. She was the girl from earlier. She was part of the group that spawned into this world alongside Kujo. The girl recognized him as well. She remembered Kujo as the man who had been prostrating earlier. She asked Kujo if he had been captured too, and he replied that he ended up there after helping Onodera. The girl grew angry upon hearing this, saying that she had also been tricked by Onodera. Kujo told her that they would not be used as food for the time being, but that they were on a time limit. The girl realized that Kujo was in this situation because of her and thanked him for saving her. Kujo told her it was no big deal, since what the villagers were doing was inexcusable anyway. The girl introduced herself as Jun. She allowed Kujo to call her by her first name since he had saved her. Kujo introduced himself as well. Jun remarked that there might be no point in learning each other's names since they would be killed eventually, and she would lose her chance to return to life. This confused Kujo at first, until he noticed that Jun was still wearing her original clothes, meaning she had not died yet. Kujo then explained everything to her, that they would keep coming back to life, that the monsters roaming the world were once humans, and that one day she would become one of them too. The only way to avoid that fate was to be revived properly. Kujo told Jun that they couldn't stay there for long and that they had to think of a way to escape. Jun was surprised that he included her in his plan. Kujo told her that he couldn't leave her behind after learning what the village did to people, and that he wanted to help her, because there had to be a reason she wanted to be revived. Jun laughed bitterly and reminded Kujo that only one person could be revived. She told him he was too kind. Kujo looked away, realizing that he had fallen back into his bad habit once again. Jun then asked how they were supposed to escape. The cage was too strong to break, made from the trees of this world. There were always guards nearby, and never just one. Even if they somehow broke free, they would be noticed immediately and captured again. And even if they managed to escape the cave, Kujo had no idea what awaited them outside. Escaping without anyone in the village noticing seemed almost impossible. Kujo regretted not surveying the village more carefully. There might have been a better escape route. As things stood, there was no realistic way out, other than accepting the condition Jinbo had given earlier. Noticing Kujo deep in thought, Jun asked what was wrong. Kujo then told her Jinbo's condition. They would be spared if Kujo captured someone else to take her place, but Kujo admitted that he couldn't do that. Even if they were spared, he would be forced to stay in the village. Jun screamed in terror, saying that living there was absolutely out of the question. She revealed that she had been given a condition when she was captured as well. They wanted her to satisfy the men with her body. They told her it was the only option, since she had no useful skills. Kujo watched Jun break down in tears. She was around the same age as his daughter, and yet the villagers were willing to do such things to her. A guard approached their cage, irritated by the noise. Kujo spoke up calmly, telling him that he was ready and that he should bring Onodera. He said he had already made his decision. When Onodera arrived, he looked surprised. He hadn't expected a response from Kujo so soon. Kujo told him that he simply didn't want to become food. Onodera let out a dry laugh and told Kujo that he should take his time to understand them. He added that he was looking forward to the replacement. Kujo already had a plan that he had made with Jun earlier. Since they had no idea how to escape, even if they got out of the cage, it would be better for him to play along and scout the village first. Still, Jun was worried that Kujo might escape on his own and leave her behind. Kujo reassured her that he would come back. Besides, he would likely be watched and wouldn't be able to escape anyway. Jun asked if he was really going to look for her replacement. Kujo stayed silent for a moment before telling her that the forest wasn't safe, so he doubted the villagers would stray far from the settlement. The village was also far from the initial flower garden, so Kujo didn't think they would find anyone. They would probably return once it got dark. Jun then asked what he would do if he actually found someone. Back in the present, Kujo analyzed the village while being escorted. He noticed that there were nothing but holes in the cave walls, and deeper inside there was no guarantee they led outside. As he searched for a possible escape route, Onodera called out to Kuroda and ordered him to accompany Kujo, confirming that Kujo had agreed to join the village by hunting a human. As they prepared to leave, Kujo noticed the moat in front of the gate. When the two of them ventured outside, Kuroda began humming cheerfully. Kujo focused on the moat. It appeared to extend all the way along the gate. It had to be a drainage channel for the firewater inside the village. If it was only a drainage channel, then it was unlikely there would be a lookout. Kujo recalled what Onodera had said earlier. There were no fighters left aside from the two gatekeepers. If that was true, escaping under the cover of night might be possible. All that remained was finding a way to get out of the cage. Kuroda continued singing, which irritated Kujo. Kuroda noticed and told him that the key to not becoming an end human was staying positive. Kujo questioned how anyone could stay positive while doing work like this. Kuroda replied that the world had changed. The justice and values people held when they were alive were now meaningless. In this world, the value of humans was simply meat. He continued, saying it was a grave mistake to think that only end humans were a threat. Humans hunted and were hunted as well. As long as they existed in this world, they would always be in danger of being eaten. However, if one belonged to the village, they would always be on the hunting side. That was how peace was obtained. Kuroda told Kujo that whatever he did, he should stay positive. He added that in a few months, Jun would understand as well and would be glad she had become useful. That remark angered Kujo, but he swallowed his rage. He didn't know what Kuroda might do if provoked. Kujo took a deep breath and focused on surviving for now, and on returning safely. Suddenly, Kuroda noticed something and pointed it out. There were human tracks. Kujo pretended not to understand and suggested that it might belong to an end human. Kuroda dismissed the idea, explaining that end humans were lighter and left shallower footprints. The crushed leaves were still green, meaning the human was nearby. As they followed the tracks, they found more signs confirming it was a human. Kujo could only pray that they wouldn't find them. Eventually, they did. Kuroda was delighted, remarking that they had found a fat one. He then told Kujo that he would take it from there. Kuroda didn't care how Kujo did it. Trickery, threats, anything was fine, as long as the target was captured alive. With no other choice left, Kujo moved to execute Plan B. Grabbing a stone, he lunged at Kuroda. As Kuroda was about to be struck from behind, he smirked as if he had known it was coming. He slammed Kujo in the stomach with his staff, forcing him to collapse to the ground. The fat man heard the noise and immediately fled, and Kuroda could only feel regret over the missed opportunity, thinking they could have obtained good meat from him. Turning to Kujo, Kuroda made it clear that Kujo's hostility was poorly concealed, and that his intentions had been obvious from the start. He correctly guessed that Kujo had no intention of capturing anyone, and was instead trying to eliminate him, while security was thin in order to save Jun. Kuroda understood everything, and even Onodera had likely noticed as well, choosing to play along because no one could change their resolve so quickly. Kuroda struck Kujo's already broken arm, drawing a scream of pain from him. This punishment had been ordered in advance, meant to bring Kujo to the brink of death should he attempt anything reckless. Kujo could do nothing but curse internally. Kuroda mocked him for his choices, noting that Kujo could have had countless opportunities had he chosen to escape alone. Yet he insisted on clinging to humanity and helping others. Because of that, he would forever remain on the hunting side and eventually become an end human. Kuroda continued beating him until Kujo lost consciousness. When he attempted to rouse him afterward, unwilling to carry him back, he failed to notice that Kujo had secretly concealed a sharp stone. By the time they returned to the village, Kuroda collapsed at the front gate, exhausted from carrying Kujo the entire way. Barely conscious, Kujo locked eyes with Onodera, who made it clear that resistance was futile and that escape would only end in capture. He warned that this was Kujo's final chance and that any further defiance would be met with no mercy. The two guards then carried Kujo back to the cage. Jinbo remarked that the ordeal had become pointless and questioned why Onodera remained so fixated on Kujo. Onodera explained that while revival was possible for the young, it was nearly impossible for an ordinary middle-aged man, and that Kujo should abandon hope and find peace. Onodera had already given up on everything, which allowed him to remain calm. Yet Kujo's presence reminded him of his former life, of dreams he once had of becoming an actor. That reminder made him nauseous. He could not bear the thought of Kujo succeeding, and in order to find peace himself, he felt compelled to drag Kujo down with him. Jinbo responded that he could not empathize with such feelings. Back in the cages, Jun quickly checked on Kujo after seeing how badly he had been beaten. Kujo weakly reassured her and revealed that he had discovered an escape route, the firewater drainage canal. He took out the sharp stone he had been hiding and explained that it would be used to break out of the cage and deal with the lookouts. There was no time to wait. The escape had to happen that very day. Immediately after saying this, Kujo collapsed once more. Jun believed it was impossible in his condition and feared that with suspicion already placed on him, he would be caught almost instantly. Kujo only reassured her again, telling her to hold on and trust that they would escape soon. Jun closed her eyes and told Kujo that he had already done more than enough. Later that night, when only a single guard remained on watch, Jun called out to him and pleaded to help Kujo. When the guard questioned why he should care, Jun resorted to desperation, offering herself in exchange for his help. The man did not hesitate to seize the opportunity, a smirk spreading across his face as he immediately unlocked the cage. He lowered his pants without delay and forced Jun down, driven by lust and convinced that her offer was genuine. He was so consumed by desire that he failed to notice the sharp stone concealed in Jun's hand. Seizing the moment, Jun drove the stone into his neck, catching him completely off guard. She continued stabbing until his body finally went limp. Moments later, Jun opened Kujo's cage, jolting him awake. Kujo was shocked to see her covered in blood and immediately checked to see if she was injured. Jun only showed him the stone he had dropped earlier, explaining through her actions that she had taken it when he lost consciousness. Kujo then realized that she was already out of her cage, and when he looked around, he noticed the guard's corpse lying near Jun's former enclosure. Jun made it clear that she had no choice, that it had been the only way for them to escape. Even though they were escaping together, she could not continue relying on Kujo alone. Kujo apologized, blaming his own helplessness for forcing her into such a situation, but Jun made it clear that her actions were driven by her desire to be revived. She was willing to do anything to see her boyfriend again. With both of them now free, it was time to escape, though they would need supplies first. They searched the area for weapons and tools. Kujo found a rope and a pouch filled with firewater, and later discovered a cleaver that once belonged to Tetsu. When he returned to Jun to signal that it was time to leave, he found her drinking blood and eating from a pot. Kujo told her it was human remains, but Jun continued anyway, having eaten nothing since her capture. With more to do than just escape, she chose to eat while she could. She even offered some to Kujo, who accepted, stunned by her resilience and how quickly she had adapted. Nearby prisoners pleaded for help, and Kujo chose to free them. Jun could hardly believe that while attempting a stealthy escape, Kujo was increasing their numbers. Still, Kujo could not abandon them, knowing they were all trapped in the same situation. One of the freed captives claimed that the jacket Kujo was wearing belonged to him and demanded it back. Jun could only glare at the man's shamelessness, while Kujo reluctantly returned it. With the village asleep, it was the perfect chance to escape. They headed toward the cliff, avoiding the opposite direction where a large pit lay, and where Jinbo's house stood nearby, making it far too dangerous. With no other option, they decided to use the rope to descend the cliff. Kujo secured it to a stone and volunteered to go first. The descent was brutal. His injured arms screamed with pain as he supported his weight with only one arm. Halfway down, he slipped, barely managing to stop himself. The friction tore into his palm, leaving it raw and bleeding, but he continued downward. Just as he neared the bottom, he heard Jun scream. When he looked up, he saw the man who had taken his jacket falling toward him, an arrow buried deep in his eye. Fortunately, the falling body did not strike Kujo. Still half dazed, he struggled to understand what had just happened and why the man had fallen. When he looked up, he noticed Jun and the others staring at something above. Following their gaze, he saw a lone silhouette standing in the darkness. It was Tani, his bow already drawn and aimed at them. One of the other prisoners panicked, screaming as he tried to run. Tani released his arrow, striking the man in the knee and sending him crashing to the ground. In an instant, Jun was the only one left, cornered at the edge of the cliff. As Tani calmly reloaded and began to take aim at her, Kujo told her to jump without hesitation. Jun clenched her teeth and leapt, grabbing onto the rope. She descended at a terrifying speed. Tani fired again, but the arrow missed. Jun endured the searing pain in her palms and feet as the rope burned into her skin. She collided with Kujo mid-descent, and together they struggled to slow themselves. Suddenly, the rope snapped. They fell, but only a short distance. By sheer luck, neither suffered serious injuries. As they forced themselves back to their feet, Kujo realized they were still within Tani's shooting range. There was no choice but to run. From above, Tani clicked his tongue in irritation. The noise finally stirred Jinbo awake, and he demanded to know what was happening. As Kujo and Jun ran, Kujo checked on her condition. She was clearly in pain, but she pushed herself forward, determined to endure it until they reached the drainage canal. They were close, almost there, when another figure stepped into their path. Kuroda was waiting. He had been told by Tani that they would pass through this route if they attempted to escape, and the prediction had been correct. Kuroda sneered, mocking Kujo for failing to learn from the beating he had already received, though there was a trace of admiration for Kujo's courage. Kujo realized with dread that even a single glance at the moat had been enough for them to anticipate this escape route. With no other option, Kujo and Jun turned and ran toward the village gate. Kuroda raised his fingers and whistled 3 sharp times. One by one, lights flickered on as villagers stirred awake. The sound was an alarm. 3 whistles meant the food had escaped. People poured out from every direction, moving quickly to surround them. Their situation deteriorated by the second. With no time left, Kujo and Jun rushed to the gate and began undoing the latch. An arrow struck Jun in the arm, dropping her to her knees in pain. The scene turned grim as Tani arrived, bow still in hand. They were completely surrounded now, more than 15 villagers closing in. Kujo steadied himself, gripping the cleaver strapped to his back, preparing for a final stand. Jinbo arrived moments later. He advanced slowly, his expression cold, remarking that they had gone farther than expected, and that he never believed they would make it this far. In his hands was a blood-stained cleaver. He revealed the name of the guard Jun had killed, making it clear that the man had been someone dear to them. Tears streamed down Jinbo's face as he confronted them. As Jinbo advanced slowly toward them, cleaver and torch in hand, Onodera arrived at the scene. He remarked bitterly on Kujo's stubbornness, unable to believe that he had still chosen to run. Before he could continue, Jinbo interrupted him and informed him that Maki, the guard Jun had killed, was dead. Onodera froze in disbelief. The surrounding villagers reacted the same way, murmuring spreading rapidly through the crowd. For the first time, Onodera lost his composure. Rage overtook him as he cursed Kujo, furious that he had even considered allowing him to join the village. The villagers followed suit, their anger boiling over as weapons were raised and voices cried out for Kujo's execution and his conversion into meat. Kujo searched desperately for a way out, but there was none. Retreating into the village was impossible, and opening the gate would only result in being riddled with arrows. As he struggled to decide his next move, Jinbo finally stepped forward. He attacked, striking Kujo with his cleaver. Kujo barely managed to block the strike, but his weakened body struggled to endure the force. As they clashed, Jinbo reflected on Maki's past, how he had once been a hunter while alive, and how he later took on the role of butcher when no one else would, despite the increased risk of becoming an end human. Jinbo explained how the transformation into an end human accelerated with every death in this world. Even if revival were possible countless times, there was no guarantee that they would ever see Maki again. With a powerful shove, Jinbo forced Kujo back and made it clear that mercy was no longer an option. The villagers roared in approval, urging Jinbo to kill him. Kujo gritted his teeth and accused Jinbo of hypocrisy. Jinbo claimed to value the people of the village as family, yet he had slaughtered countless others without hesitation. If he could feel such attachment, then he should have understood the pain of those he had killed. People who, like Kujo, were climbing toward the peak for the sake of their loved ones. Kujo refused to allow Jinbo's selfish resolve to block his path. Jinbo responded by thrusting the torch forward, burning Kujo's side. Kujo managed to sever the torch and perform a counterattack. But Jinbo caught his wrist and struck him again. But his broken arm took the brunt of the exchange. The blade cut deep, nearly severing it, and Kujo screamed in agony. Jinbo struck him with a punch, sending him crashing to the ground. Leaving his cleaver on Kujo's arm, Jinbo mounted Kujo and pinned him down. He criticized Kujo for trying to please everyone, claiming that such a mindset only led to losing what truly mattered. Jinbo reflected on how the village began with him alone, driven only by the desire to create a place where he would no longer be hunted by end humans. Slowly, others joined him, and before he realized it, the settlement had become the only place in the world where he felt at peace. For that reason, he was willing to commit any act, no matter how selfish, to protect it. Jinbo wrapped his hands around Kujo's throat and began to strangle him, determined to deny him a swift death, and instead let him die in agony. Kujo hovered on the edge of death, his lungs burning as he struggled for air. Then, suddenly, June forced herself upright. Ignoring the pain, she tore the arrow from her wound, seized the severed torch, and endured the flames scorching her hands. With everything she had left, she hurled it into the firewater lake. Jinbo shouted for it to stop, but it was already too late. Before anyone could react, the fire ignited the firewater like a signal flare. The flames spread instantly, erupting like a beacon within the village. June gasped for breath as Onodera and the others stared in horror, struggling to comprehend what was unfolding. Villagers who had been standing too close to the firewater were engulfed in flames, their bodies burning alive as they screamed in agony. Jinbo reacted immediately, barking orders for buckets of blood to be brought in and attempt to smother the fire. He abandoned Kujo without hesitation and rushed to extinguish the burning villagers. The fire was not the only problem. As Jinbo worked desperately to put out the flames, Kujo was overwhelmed by the stench of scorched flesh. The smell reminded him of incense. Jun staggered over to Kujo and urged him to move. This was no time to stand around. With everyone's attention focused on the spreading fire and the wounded, it was their only chance to escape. Kujo clenched his teeth, forced himself upright, and tore the cleaver free from his injured arm. Ignoring the pain, he rushed to the gate and began undoing the latch. Jinbo noticed too late and reacted instantly, trying to stop them before the gate could be opened. Despite this, the latch was released. What greeted them was not freedom. End humans surged toward the village the moment the gate opened, their distorted bodies rushing forward in a frenzy. Kujo and Jun froze, unable to understand why they were there. Jinbo shoved them aside and threw himself against the gate alongside Kuroda, desperately trying to force it shut. The fire had drawn them in. The smell of burned flesh was irresistible to the end humans, overpowering enough to lure them from far beyond the surrounding area. They were already at the gate, pounding against it relentlessly. Panic spread through the village. Jinbo organized the defense immediately, ordering all available arrows to be brought out. Those who could use bows took positions above, firing down at the approaching horde. Others braced themselves at the gate, determined to prevent the end humans from entering at any cost. Arrows rained down from above. Several end humans fell into the firewater-filled moat and were consumed by flames, their bodies writhing as they burned. Still, it wasn't enough. Tani's expression darkened as yet another horde emerged from the darkness, rushing toward the village. There were far too many. The number of arrows was dwindling, and the gate was beginning to splinter under the relentless assault. Kuroda recognized the danger immediately and urged retreat, but Jinbo refused to yield. With the moat engulfed in flames, the gate was the only path forward. If the bridge burned through, it might slow the horde long enough for them to survive. The firewater could be dealt with later. if anyone lived through the night. Just as Jinbo reached this conclusion, disaster struck. An end human was hurled over the gate and catapulted into the village itself. The end human crashed down directly onto Jinbo, its weight driving him to the ground as more end humans poured into the village. Jinbo struggled beneath it, barely holding it back as slaughter erupted around him. The gate above had already been compromised. The sheer number of end humans allowed them to climb over one another, swarming the top of the gate and spilling inside. Tani was the only one still standing atop the gate, the rest having already fallen. As the horde flooded in, villagers broke ranks and fled in all directions. Kuroda remained behind as the last line of defense, fighting desperately as end humans clawed at the villagers, tearing into their faces and devouring them alive. Screams echoed through the cave as the village collapsed into carnage. Jun grabbed Kujo's attention and urged him to move. This place was no longer safe. There was no escape through the gate anymore, and the drainage route was no longer an option. With every path cut off, death felt the only option. Onodera was knocked to the ground by an end human. His body slammed into the stone floor. Jinbo acted instantly, cutting the creature down before it could finish him. Onodera was left shaking, overwhelmed by despair as he realized the village was finished. Kuroda and Tani regrouped nearby, Kuroda clearly wounded and barely standing. Jinbo looked around at the devastation, the villagers being slaughtered one after another, their lives ending in moments. Watching it unfold, he finally reached a decision. He took up a torch filled with firewater and hurled it at an end human feeding on one of his fallen companions. The creature was engulfed in flames, its body burning violently. The scent of scorched flesh filled the air, instantly drawing the attention of the other end humans. Like moths to a flame, they rushed toward it, tearing into the burning creature instead. Seizing the opening created by the distraction, Jinbo signaled the retreat. They rushed toward the hole that could lead to another exit, and Kujo and Jun watched, realizing this could be their way out. Jinbo stayed at the exit, torch in hand, letting Tani and Kuroda go first. Kujo and Jun were hidden nearby, confirming that it was an escape route, but Kujo was bleeding very badly, making Jun worried. Kujo assured her that they were almost out. They waited for Jinbo to leave so they could follow, but Jinbo had already noticed their presence and told them that he would never forgive him as he broke the pots full of firewater. With chilling words, he told him that the next time he saw him would be the last moment of his life, that he would torture him until he became an end human. Kujo yelled for him to stop, but Jinbo had already dropped the torch, engulfing the exit in fire. Jun collapsed to her knees, already half given up. But Kujo told her that it was not over yet, because this was not the only hole they were entering. There must be multiple escape routes, and together they would escape this place. As they looked around, the gate finally collapsed and the horde of end humans poured in. As they desperately looked for an exit, they finally found one on the ground, but before they could reach it, Kujo's wounds finally caught up to him, making him collapse to the ground. He assured Jun that he was okay, that he was just feeling weak. Then, Jun noticed that the end humans were almost there, urging him to hurry, but Kujo could not stand by himself anymore. Jun made a decision and told him that she would carry his stuff for him. Kujo apologized and thanked her, but Jun told him not to thank her, as she poured the firewater inside the pouch onto Kujo, which confused him, and he asked what she was doing. Outside the village, the surviving villagers could only watch as flames swallowed everything they had built. Fire spread uncontrollably, licking through wooden structures as end humans poured in, tearing into their friends and devouring them alive. Screams were drowned out by crackling fire and wet, tearing sounds. The village they had poured their lives into was gone. Once again, they were reduced to prey, forced to live in fear of end humans. Jinbo stood frozen, his chest heaving, before finally screaming Kujo's name with a rage so raw it tore at his throat. Back at the escape route, Kujo begged Jun to stop, his voice weak and trembling, but she kept pouring until the pouch ran dry. Firewater soaked his body. Jun's hands shook as she apologized for what she was about to do, then picked up a nearby torch. Kujo asked why she would do this when he had promised they would escape together. Jun told him it was no longer possible. She couldn't escape while dragging him along. Kujo pleaded with her to stop, but Jun's voice broke as she told him this wasn't something she wanted to do. It was the only way she could survive. She wanted to see her boyfriend again. There was something she had to ask him in person, something she couldn't give up on. She called Kujo a hero, saying he had helped her so much that he ended up broken and beaten. With tears in her eyes, she raised the torch toward him, begging him to help her one last time. Kujo tried to crawl away, dragging his ruined body across the ground, but it was too late. The torch was dropped onto him, and fire exploded across his body. Pain, unlike anything he had ever known, tore through him. He screamed so violently that Jun had to turn away. All Kujo could do was cry out for help, but when he looked up, Jun was already running, her figure disappearing into the hole. An end-human slammed him to the ground. More followed, piling onto him, their teeth sinking into his burning flesh. He was being eaten alive while still on fire. The pain was indescribable. His nerves screamed as his body was torn apart, flames and teeth working together to erase him. All he had wanted was to help. He hadn't wanted thanks, but this was too cruel. Everything had happened because he chose to help Jun, and for that, he was beaten, burned, and used as bait so she could escape. As his consciousness faded, Kujo wondered why this world was so twisted, why everyone was so broken. Then Nero's final words resurfaced in his mind. He needed to throw away his kindness if he wants to reach the top of the mountain. Kujo died, and his consciousness returned to the underground, his right face contorting as his body reformed. Deep into the forest, an end-human fled in terror, desperately trying to escape something chasing it. It glanced back one last time, and a spear tore through its head. The one who had thrown it stepped forward. It was Kujo. After dismantling the corpse of the end-human, Kujo moved to a nearby branch and began training, pulling himself up repeatedly while a boulder was tied to his feet. When he finally finished his set, he hung there for a moment before dropping down, bent over and gasping for air. It had been 3 months since he was brought into this world, yet he still hadn't reached the foot of the mountain. In that short span of time, he had already died 20 times. Not only to end humans, he had been burned alive, starved to death, suffocated, fell to death. By now, he felt like he had experienced nearly every way a person could die. And yet, after 3 months, he had begun to understand how this world worked. His body grew stronger when he trained here. Even if he died, the strength he built remained. That realization changed everything. The more he trained, the easier it became to fight end humans and push forward. There was a caveat, however. Not everything carried over. His body seemed to reset to roughly a week before his death. He could tell by his wounds. Recent injuries vanished, but older scars stayed. A week was only an estimate. Sometimes wounds lingered after just 3 days. Other times they disappeared, even after more than a week. He didn't understand the variance, but he could feel which injuries had settled into his body. Those never went away. That meant he had to be careful. If he ever suffered a crippling injury, death would be his only option. After training, Kujo returned to the dismantled corpse and began to eat. The flesh of end humans could be used as sustenance. He knew that now. Still, the moment it touched his tongue, his body rebelled. He gagged, nearly vomiting it back up, but forced himself to swallow. The meat was sinewy and tough, reeking like a moldy rag. His stomach churned violently, instinct screaming that this wasn't food. Every bite made him feel closer to becoming an end human himself. But he refused to be like Jinbo. He would never hunt other humans. If he ever found a corpse, he would take it, but luck couldn't be relied on. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to grow stronger, he had no choice but to consume this filth. Thanks to his training, Kujo had managed to push past the forest. There, survival was simple. Stay hidden, ambush end humans when hungry. Beyond the forest, however, that strategy no longer worked. The terrain turned rocky and exposed, offering nowhere to hide. There was a reason he hadn't reached the foot of the mountain. One of the rocks behind him suddenly shifted, revealing an end human mutated to resemble the terrain itself. Its massive arm fused into a slab of living rock, dragging against the ground as it turned toward him. The end human swung its massive rock-like arm, aiming to crush Kujo, but he rolled aside just in time. This was why he couldn't get closer to the mountain. The nearer he approached, the more grotesque and monstrous the end humans became. The creature lunged again, but Kujo dodged, sustaining only a shallow cut. He forced himself to calm down. Aiming for its heart would take time, and even a successful strike wouldn't kill it instantly. One misstep, and he'd be at the mercy of its counterattack. He needed to disable it in a single, decisive move. Kujo targeted the joints of its arm with his spear, stabbing through the thin part. Twisting the weapon, he severed its arm, and the end human collapsed to the ground. Seizing the opening, Kujo drove the spear into its head, killing it instantly. Catching his breath, Kujo inspected his own body. 2 small wounds, nothing serious. He looked down at the corpse and couldn't help but shudder. If this creature had once been human, how could it have transformed so drastically? A noise behind him made him whirl around. 2 more end humans, identical to the one he had just slain, were advancing. Kujo was surprised because he hadn't detected their presence. If every end human near the mountain was like this, no amount of training would allow him to progress. Kujo gritted his teeth as the 2 charged, but before they could reach him, a halberd sliced through them, cleaving them clean in half. Kujo froze. The silhouette was familiar. His chest tightened as he recognized the figure approaching. It was someone he had met before. It was an end human twice his size, more humanoid than any he had ever encountered, and it wielded a weapon. Kujo cursed under his breath and ran, realizing this was the worst possible outcome. He remembered the first time he made it out of the forest, when suddenly this thing appeared before him. He tried to stab it with his spear, but it hadn't even flinched. One single kick to his stomach had sent him flying, slamming into a boulder. In an instant, it was over. He couldn't do a thing. This creature was a monster in every sense of the word. The end human grinned and hurled its halberd at him, using every fiber of its muscles. Kujo managed to dodge. The halberd smashed into a nearby boulder, splintering it into pieces. The creature sprinted toward him with terrifying speed, retrieving the halberd mid-run. It leapt high and far, landing directly in front of Kujo. This creature was not only monstrously strong, but also terrifyingly fast. Desperate, Kujo scooped up sand and threw it into its eyes, momentarily blinding it, and dashed away. But the monster recovered instantly, hunting him relentlessly. Kujo grabbed a bolus from his bag and flung it at its feet. The end human tripped and fell, giving Kujo a small window. He lunged with his spear, finally striking at the creature. The culmination of months of brutal training, meant to transform his weak, beaten self into someone capable of killing this monstrosity. But the end human was cunning. Even on the ground, it flicked sand into Kujo's eyes, blinding him in return. With a savage swing of its halberd, it sliced through 2 of Kujo's arms, sending him reeling in agony. The creature ripped the bolas from his feet and swung a devastating punch at him, but Kujo managed to defend himself with both arms. The force, however, still sent him flying into a boulder. He bled profusely as he stared at his severed arm. This injury alone should have been the end. Even with all his training and preparation, he didn't stand a chance. What more would he need to finally reach the summit? The monsters loomed over him, moving slowly as if savoring the moment before the kill. But suddenly, Kujo leapt at him, swinging his severed arm and punching it square in the face. The hit was strong enough to break a tooth. Even in the face of despair, Kujo refused to give up. He howled, sinking his teeth into the monster's neck so hard that he felt his own teeth threaten to shatter. The creature paused, gripping Kujo by the head with one massive hand and lifting him off the ground. Then, with a chilling smile, it said, "You've passed." Before Kujo could react, the monster's punch slammed into his face, knocking him out. When Kujo finally woke up, he found himself in an unfamiliar place. His body was strapped tightly to a table. He had been captured. No matter how hard he struggled, the restraints didn't budge. As he turned his head, his surroundings came into focus. Notes were scattered everywhere. Surgical tools stained dark with old blood lay neatly arranged. Sketches of human and end human anatomy covered the walls, layered over one another as if rewritten countless times. Numbers were carved into the stone, marked with tallies beneath them. Below those marks lay dismantled corpses. Humans and end humans alike, cut open, emptied, discarded. Then it came back to him. The monster. The very creature he had been fighting before losing consciousness entered the room, dragging in fresh corpses of both human and end-human. He thrashed against the table, panic rising, but the bindings held him completely still. The creature placed the bodies onto a nearby table, and the creature calmly signaled for Kujo to stop struggling, assuring him that he wouldn't do anything to him. For now. What shocked Kujo more was that it spoke. Confusion turned into disbelief as the creature removed its hood, revealing a human face beneath. The body before him was massive, inhuman in build and movement, yet the face was undeniably human. The man began dismantling one of the human corpses, drinking its blood without hesitation. Fear crept in as he wondered how long it would be before he ended up the same way. Then the man addressed Kujo's arm. Kujo looked down and froze. His severed arm was back in place. Kujo was certain his arm had been cut off, yet here it was, attached as if it had never happened. The man explained it plainly. The arm had simply been reattached and the bleeding stopped. Through experimentation, he learned that it wasn't necessary to connect nerves with these bodies. Almost like grafting plants together, he dismissed it as crude compared to the surgeries he once performed in the world of the living. Kujo was told to rest. It would take about a week before full movement returned. Kujo demanded to know what was being done to him, what the man wanted. The man answered with a question of his own. He asked Kujo whether he wanted to be stronger. As one climbed the mountain, the end humans became increasingly monstrous. Human limits, however, did not change. Kujo had reached a wall. No amount of ordinary training would allow him to surpass it. The man claimed he could give Kujo power beyond human limits. He had developed a method for that exact purpose. When Kujo asked what the price was, the man only smiled. All Kujo had to do was endure it. Endure the transplant of end human flesh. To prove his point, the man gestured to another table, where the corpse of a human lay, dead in the middle of the procedure. The man ripped a chunk of muscle tissue from the corpse and told Kujo that several end human muscle tissues would be grafted onto his body. The more muscle mass he could control, the more strength he would gain. To put it simply, it was a power armor crafted from end human flesh. Using human flesh was also possible, but end human flesh had less fat and moisture. When bundled at the same thickness, it was vastly more efficient. Kujo could only stare at him and ask what the hell he was talking about, saying there was no way any of this was possible. The man replied that the proof was standing right in front of him. Just like Kujo, he had reached an impasse. He tried again and again, but no matter how much effort he put in, he couldn't advance. It was nothing but a cycle of constantly realizing his own weakness. He felt his limits closing in on him. At one point, his arm was severed by an end human. Somehow, he managed to escape, but it was already a hopeless situation. Death seemed inevitable. That was when he found a human corpse. He was desperate at that point, and if his only option was to die, he figured he might as well sew the corpse's arm onto his own body. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible. There was no way to properly connect blood vessels and nerves in a world with no equipment. The limb should have become necrotic, not to mention the rejection that would occur when attaching someone else's body part. It was a surgery that was guaranteed to fail. And yet, it worked. The arm firmly connected. Something that was impossible in the world of the living had happened. That was when it hit him. Perhaps he could strengthen his body in a way that completely defied the laws of the living world. The man explained that he had been a plastic surgeon while he was still alive. He began to wonder if he could somehow make use of those skills here. That was when he came up with the idea of transplanting end human muscle. Normally, muscle transplants use one's own tissue to repair damaged areas. But if muscles that weren't originally yours could be used, then enhancements should also be possible. After that realization, the man was consumed by experiments. How to successfully integrate end human flesh into a human body. How to make those muscles even stronger. It was nothing but trial and error, repeated endlessly. An entire year later, he finally created the body he now possessed. Kujo thought the man was absolutely batshit insane, but he couldn't deny that the strength was real. Kujo then asked him, assuming everything he said was true, why he wanted to perform the surgery on him. What was he trying to achieve? The man answered by saying it was necessary. He needed an ally to enter the mountain. He pointed to a drawing of Tomoria crudely sketched on the wall. For someone who could draw human anatomy so well, his drawing of Tomoria was absolutely terrible. Kujo questioned what the man meant, whether he truly could not enter the mountain alone. The explanation was simple. It was not a matter of choice, but impossibility. As one approaches the foot of the mountain, a thick fog gradually envelops the area. The man did not understand the mechanism behind it, but no matter how long one continued forward, they would always arrive at the same place. There was only one way through. Passing the gate allowed entry into the mountain itself, but beyond it lay a monster lying in wait. The man cursed Tomoria for setting that creature there, deliberately preventing resurrection. It was an end human. He had challenged it many times and concluded that he could not kill it on his own. Kujo was stunned. The existence of a monster that even this man could not defeat was hard to accept. The man explained that he no longer had much time. The surgery did not come without drawbacks. Gaining this power had accelerated his end-human transformation. He had already reached the limit of strengthening himself. Resurrection was meaningless if he could not advance further, and so he had no choice but to find an ally. That was why he had been searching for someone who did not give up in the face of adversity. Kujo fit that description perfectly. His mental fortitude was evident, and the man was certain he could endure the surgery. There was no time to waste. The man explained the procedure again. As stated before, he would bundle end-human muscles and graft them onto Kujo's body, allowing them to connect naturally. However, for that to happen, all of Kujo's skin would need to be removed first. Normally, this was done gradually, but with no time to spare, Kujo's entire body would have to be done at once. There was no equipment in this world, no anesthesia, no sedatives. The pain of the surgery and the suffering that followed would far exceed anything Kujo had ever imagined. The man had performed this procedure on 8 people so far, and most of them had died from shock. Still, Kujo's ability to fight even after having his arms severed convinced him that Kujo could endure it. Kujo considered the procedure absurd, that he was going to undergo such a fucked up surgery. But the man believed otherwise. He had paid the price for this power. He had cut open hundreds of humans and endured days of agony as a test subject himself. He had worked relentlessly to achieve this result, and now he was offering it to Kujo freely. In his mind, the price Kujo would pay was cheap compared to the immense power he would gain. The man believed the surgery was meaningless if Kujo was unwilling to accept that level of risk. With kind of mindset, success was impossible. If Kujo rejected the offer, he would simply be used as food, and another candidate would be sought. The man asked Kujo if he wanted him to kill him painlessly right then. Kujo thought carefully. First, he had been restrained. Now this man intended to do whatever he wanted with him. He can't trust this guy, yet there was no escape either. Part of Kujo believed he was nothing more than an experiment, but at the same time, he needed strength for his daughter. Still, the fear of being used once again gnawed at him. Grinding his teeth, Kujo made his decision. He chose to accept the surgery and demanded the power. Seeing Kujo's resolve, the man was satisfied. As preparations began, the man designated Kujo as number 9. Kujo refused the label and insisted on his name instead. This amused the man, as Ku also meant 9 in Japanese, which he took as fate. A severed arm was placed into Kujo's mouth to give him something to bite down on. The man finally revealed his name, Azuma, and made it clear that he would be relying on Kujo if the surgery succeeded. Azuma wasted no time. With blood loss being a critical concern, there was no room for caution. There would be no slow, careful peeling. He cut away Kujo's skin and stripped it away all at once. Kujo was peeled alive like a banana, able only to endure as a muffled scream tore from his throat. Hours later, Azuma was satisfied. Kujo had endured it well. The surgery itself was a success. However, this was far from the end. In truth, it marked the beginning of hell. What followed was the waiting period, the time required for the grafted muscles to connect and settle into his body. The pain was unbearable. It was so intense that Kujo felt his sanity slipping away. Time crawled at a torturous pace, each moment stretching endlessly. At times, he even wished someone would end his life and put him out of his misery. His eyes rolled back, his mouth foamed, and his body convulsed as agony consumed him from within. Yet Kujo endured. He remembered the pain of being burned alive by June, the sensation of his flesh igniting and peeling away. Compared to what he was experiencing now, that pain felt insignificant. As the days passed, some of his hair began to turn white. Azuma kept him alive during this period, feeding him while monitoring his condition. He removed stitches as needed and constantly worked to stop the bleeding whenever it resurfaced, enduring it all for power and for his daughter. Eventually, the pain began to subside. Kujo no longer knew how many days had passed. When his awareness fully returned, Azuma informed him that the muscles had completely connected. The surgery was a success. All the stitches had already been removed, and Kujo was now free to move. His body would feel strange at first, and caution was advised. Kujo attempted to walk. His movements were awkward, unfamiliar. Then he noticed something unsettling. He approached Azuma's halberd and attempted to lift it. No matter how hard he tried, he could not raise it even a foot off the ground. A hollow laugh escaped him as he stared at Azuma with bloodshot eyes. His strength had not increased at all. The muscles were not responding. Instead of becoming stronger, his body simply felt heavier, burdened by dead weight. In frustration, he seized Azuma, convinced he had been deceived. Azuma told him to remain calm. The surgery had worked, but it was not complete. While the muscles had successfully grafted to Kujo's body, the nerves had not yet connected. Until the nerves adapted and synchronized, the end-human muscles would remain inert, nothing more than dead weight. Only through training would Kujo be able to control them freely. And so Kujo began his training arc, with Azuma acting as his trainer. Kujo was made to perform squats endlessly, forced to push his body to its absolute limit. To Kujo, it felt no different from ordinary strength training, and he couldn't understand how this was supposed to help. Azuma's method was not about building strength alone. Strength training by itself would accomplish nothing. Kujo needed to visualize it. Threads of nerves spreading through the exhausted muscles, weaving into the foreign flesh. His brain had to recognize those muscles as his own, to command them as if they had always belonged there. Kujo followed the instructions. He visualized the nerves as he trained, pushing through squats, push-ups, dumbbell rows, pull-ups, and bench presses. He repeated the process over and over, grinding his body down. But nothing changed. By the third day, there was still no sign of progress. The muscles remained dead weight. Azuma lost his patience and concluded that Kujo was either stupid or simply too old, because he was doing terribly. The visualization was sloppy, unfocused, practically non-existent. Kujo began to doubt the entire process. To him, it felt like proof that the surgery had failed, and Azuma was only trying to cover up his mistake. Azuma responded with a tired sigh. Without explanation, he grabbed Kujo by the head and dragged him outside. They arrived at the edge of a short cliff. At that point, Azuma decided that training alone was no longer enough. If nothing was changing, then drastic measures were required. Kujo was thrown off the cliff. His body slammed against the rock wall before plunging downward, crashing into the firewater lake below. Kujo wondered if Azuma was trying to kill him. Azuma answered that there was no time to waste. That was why he had thrown him into a situation where he had no choice but to become stronger. A splash echoed nearby. Something was approaching. Kujo turned just in time to see an end human approaching. It was grotesque, shaped like a panther, its body twisted and wrong, and it was far larger than Kujo. Before Kujo could analyze the abomination, it growled and lunged at him. Kujo barely dodged its claws as they tore through the spot where he had been standing. Getting hit even once would be fatal. He had no choice but to keep his distance, but he couldn't run fast. His body had grown heavy from the implanted muscles. The end human quickly caught up and swept its claws again. Kujo moved away just in time, but the creature leapt onto the wall and used it to build momentum, launching itself straight at him. It was too fast. Kujo had no time to react. The monster's claws tore into his chest, sending him flying several meters before he finally stopped. Kujo was still alive. The firewater had softened his fall, and the muscles grafted onto his body absorbed most of the damage. The end human charged again. Kujo forced himself to run, but from above, Azuma watched coldly, questioning why Kujo kept fleeing when he now possessed the strength to kill it. Kujo couldn't understand it. How was he supposed to use strength that wouldn't respond? But continuing to run meant certain death. With no other choice left, he turned to face the monster. Kujo's eyes widened. The monster chasing him had disappeared. As Kujo searched for it, he failed to notice the creature using the same technique as before. It was already above him. The monster slammed him into the ground. Without his reinforced muscles, his spine would have shattered instantly. Believing Kujo to be dead, the monster lunged for his neck. Kujo jammed his arm into its mouth instead. His instincts had been right. His body was heavier, but it could now endure overwhelming force. With this, he could suffocate the creature to death. Watching from above, Azuma concluded that Kujo was indeed old and stupid. Kujo completely failed to grasp the purpose of this situation. At this rate, he would ruin everything. Even while being suffocated, the end human overpowered him. Kujo was durable, but he was not strong. The end human slammed him into the wall and pinned him to the ground. It quickly realized that Kujo's face was the softest part and tried to bite it off. Kujo struggled to stop its jaws, but death felt inevitable. He had endured all that hellish pain from the twisted surgery. If he died here, everything would have been for nothing. Kujo could not let that happen. As the end human closed in on his neck, Kujo desperately begged his nerves to connect. He began visualizing the nerves spreading, commanding the dead muscles to move. He repeated it over and over, pushing his mind to its limit, until something finally responded. The muscles moved. With a sudden surge of strength, Kujo ripped off the end human's jaw. The creature leapt back in confusion, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Kujo stared at the jaw in his hands, trying to remember the sensation he had felt moments ago. The nerves had finally connected. From above, Azuma grinned. The end human swiped its claws at Kujo again. This time, Kujo caught the attack and disabled it. The monster tried using its other arm, but that too was seized. Now, in terms of strength, they were equal, or perhaps Kujo was even stronger. Kujo fainted, grabbed the monster by the hip, and used every fiber of his muscles to lift it off the ground. He hurled it into the wall with overwhelming force. The creature crashed into it, blood splattering everywhere. The end human was still alive, barely able to stand. But the situation had already changed. Kujo walked toward the monster slowly. The end human could do nothing but stare back at him in terror. In a final desperate attempt, it lunged forward. Kujo gathered every fiber of muscle in his arm and unleashed a single punch, shattering the end human's face into chunks. The end human finally died. Kujo looked at his arm, realizing he had finally unlocked his strength. With this power, he could surely advance toward the mountain. Watching from above, Azuma laughed, satisfied that Kujo was now ready to face the end human guarding the gate. Along the way, Kujo and Azuma encountered worm-like end humans. One attacked Kujo first, its body snapping toward him like a whip, but he managed to dodge and stab it with his spear. Another emerged from behind, and with his newfound strength, he blocked its attack and piked its head onto his spear. He was getting accustomed to his new body. Two more emerged. He went at them with full force, but his spear couldn't handle it and snapped. Before he could reach for his knife, the worm-like end humans coiled around him, making him unable to move. Azuma chopped its head off and told Kujo not to get careless. This was no place to get injured, and they hadn't even reached the gate yet. Azuma demolished the rest of the end humans himself. Kujo watched in shock. No matter how many times he saw it, he couldn't believe Azuma's monstrous strength, which only made him more worried about the guardian at the gate if even Azuma couldn't defeat it alone. Another end human emerged from behind, so Kujo pushed the thought aside and focused on the fight in front of him. Moments later, they had killed them all and were ready to proceed. Along the way, Kujo couldn't help but stare at Azuma, who was dragging an end human corpse and eating it as he walked, completely unbothered. He finally asked how he could be so unfazed by it. Azuma handed him some meat and told him to eat. Their bodies burned a lot of energy, and he needed to replenish himself after fighting. He added that his own body depleted even faster because of how large he had become. Kujo asked how he got that big. Surgery, Azuma said. He had hunted people and used their flesh and bones to extend his own body, arms first, then legs, one part at a time. The bigger the body, the higher the muscle mass, and the heavier it became. In battle, an advantage of that magnitude was unheard of. It was all for the purpose of climbing the mountain. He mentioned that he had wanted to perform the same procedure on Kujo, but their time was too limited. Kujo couldn't believe Azuma was willing to go that far just to be resurrected. He found himself wondering if there was someone Azuma cared about, but he quickly discarded the thought. Their partnership ended the moment they were past the gate, and if anything, he should be thinking about when to make the first move before Azuma made his. Then Azuma told him not to move. Kujo noticed the fog had become so thick they couldn't see anything around them, exactly as Azuma had described. He asked if the gate was nearby. Azuma said yes, but it seemed someone had gotten there before them. A group of humans, and they were armed. The two watched the group as the fog around them grew thicker. The leader barked orders, telling everyone to form a circle, since they had no idea where the enemy would come from. He added that he would kill anyone who became a hindrance. The others had no choice but to follow, since he was the strongest among them. One hothead took out his frustration on a luggage carrier who had drifted out of formation. The one-eyed one told the leader that the gate had to be nearby, and that it would get them into the mountain. The fat one worried about the monstrous end human guarding it, but the leader reassured them that no matter what kind of monster it had once been human. They had enough fighters to handle it if they came up with a strategy and overwhelmed it with numbers. They just had to kill it like they always did. The others had no choice but to agree and follow. Azuma couldn't help but be impressed that they had made it this far with trustworthy companions and no betrayals in a world like this. He wondered whether it was because their leader was exceptional or simply because fear kept everyone in line. Kujo asked what they were going to do. If they were heading to the same location, they might end up fighting alongside them. Azuma told him they weren't joining the group. There was a possibility they'd be seen as enemies. Instead, they would stay hidden and use them to their advantage. It was a good opportunity for Kujo to observe how the monster moved. If the group got wiped out, there was a chance they'd have weakened it first. If they managed to defeat it, Azuma and Kujo could take advantage of that and proceed. He asked if Kujo had any objections. Kujo agreed to go through with it. They arrived at the gate. The group was visibly shocked by its size. It was so tall that Kujo couldn't see the top of it. Azuma told him to stop looking at the gate and focus on what was about to happen. At its base, two massive chains were connected to it. As the group drew closer, the chains began to move. The group was startled, and that was when they noticed it. The gatekeeper walked slowly toward them. It was an amalgamation of four huge end humans, its claws razor sharp, and it moved like a spider, and it was as big as a house. The gatekeeper roared. The group was clearly stunned by what they were seeing. It ran toward them, pulling the chains taut against the gate, and that triggered something. A wall of chains ascended from the ground, enclosing them in a confined space with the gatekeeper. Azuma explained that this was what happened when you got close to it. You either killed it or you died. Running was not an option. The group stood frozen, too dazed to react, and the gatekeeper was already moving. It crushed one of the humans under its hand, grabbed him, twisted his head until it separated from his body, and ate him. The group watched in horror, but the leader immediately snapped them out of it, ordering everyone to stop standing in one place, scatter, and maintain their distance. They needed to regroup and get into formation. The gatekeeper swiped at the humans breaking away, focusing on the carrier and the hothead, but the chains stopped it from reaching them. It was close. The leader noticed it couldn't reach the edge of the enclosure and immediately ordered the luggage carrier to bring out the javelins. He told everyone to take one and line up along the wall. They were going to aim for its eyes. The leader threw first. The javelin struck the gatekeeper's eye and it roared in agony. Kujo and Azuma watched from outside, both impressed by how quickly the leader had assessed the situation. If they took out its eyes, the gatekeeper wouldn't be able to track them, and they could close the distance. The group kept at it, The strategy was working, 3 eyes down. But they were running out of javelins and wouldn't be able to take out all of them. One human called for a full assault before they ran out, but the one-eyed man stopped them, calling them idiots, telling them that they should take advantage of the safe zone. Because if they looked down, there were weapons scattered all over the ground that they could throw. They had been so fixated on the gatekeeper, they hadn't even noticed. Then the leader went still. He told everyone to wait. If this was truly a safe zone, why were all these weapons here? There was only one answer. This was where people had died. The weapons belonged to them. Before anyone could process that, the gatekeeper began to cough. It reached a hand into its own mouth, digging into its throat, pulling something out. The group watched in confusion, unsure of what it was doing. The gatekeeper reached into its own throat and pulled out a handful of blood, gastric juice, and human remains, holding it in its palm. The only one who saw its intention in time was the leader, who immediately shouted for everyone to run. But it was too late. The gatekeeper splashed the vomit across them. At first they felt nothing, only disgust and irritation. But Azuma grabbed Kujo and told him that was the one thing he absolutely could not get hit by. Then the screaming started. One by one, wherever the vomit had made contact, their flesh began to dissolve. It ate through them slowly, and one by one, they collapsed and died. The only ones left were the leader and the hothead. They couldn't believe its vomit could do that. The hothead wanted to run, but the chain walls blocked every path. Staying put meant melting where they stood, so charging was the only option. The hothead wanted to back out, but desperation won. The two of them ran straight at it. The gatekeeper reached into its throat again. They pushed harder, trying to close the distance before it could collect enough. But it was cunning. Instead of gathering the vomit in its palm, it flung it directly at them. They barely had time to react. The leader grabbed the hothead and shoved him into the path of it, using him as a shield. The hothead cursed at him. Then the gatekeeper swung and flattened him like a pancake. The leader evaded, slipping into the blind spot of its wounded eye and getting underneath it. The gatekeeper attacked relentlessly, throwing arm after arm at him, but he weaved through every strike. When it had exhausted its reach, he saw his opening. He leapt and slashed for its neck and was swatted dead before he got there. Just like that, they were all gone. After the battle, the gatekeeper gathered the corpses and dragged them back toward the gate. The chain walls descended back into the ground. It settled down and began to eat. Kujo asked Azuma how they were supposed to kill it. Azuma told him to follow and said he had a plan. Moments later, after discussing the plan, Azuma gave Kujo sandals with stone soles to protect them from the vomit. Kujo commented on how reckless the plan was, but since they had nothing better, they decided to try it. They started by throwing large boulders around the gatekeeper, confusing it. They kept at it until a significant number of boulders were scattered across the area. Then they ran toward the gatekeeper. Kujo and Azuma threw stones at it, clearly aiming for its eyes. The gatekeeper moved, tugging the chains and activating the wall mechanism. It tried to reach Kujo, but failed because he was in the safe zone, so it reached into its throat to throw vomit at them. Azuma yelled that it was coming, and they used the boulders as cover. Kujo couldn't believe it was working, but Azuma told him there was no time to relax. They kept attacking, throwing stones to provoke the gatekeeper, then hiding behind boulders whenever it vomited. This was the plan they had discussed earlier. Since the gatekeeper was made of 4 end humans connected together, each one independent with its own brain and heart, Azuma's theory was that they needed to destroy its vital points one by one to kill it. As they had already seen, getting past its arms was no easy feat, and doing it 4 times was too risky. So to defeat all 4 at once, they had to destroy its belly. The 4 end humans were fused at the center, so there was a high chance the blood vessels from all 4 bodies were concentrated there. If they destroyed that point, they should be able to kill all 4 at once through blood loss. Kujo was skeptical about how they would reach it since the belly was so high. On top of that, if they attacked it directly, a huge amount of acid would likely burst out and spray everywhere. That was why they first had to empty its stomach. so they kept provoking the gatekeeper to make it vomit over and over. It had already thrown up 8 times, and there was still no sign of it running low. Even if they stayed in place, their movement was gradually being restricted by the acid on the ground. Kujo started wondering if the plan would really work. Then the gatekeeper adapted. Noticing that throwing vomit at them wasn't working, all of its heads looked upward, and it started punching its own belly to force itself to vomit. The acid shot upward like a fountain and rained down on Azuma and Kujo. But this was also part of their plan. Kujo ran underneath it with a large pike in his hand. They had predicted it might start vomiting upward and make the boulders useless. If that happened, they would slip under the gatekeeper and open a hole in its stomach from below. Kujo put all his strength into it, and the pike pierced its belly. The gatekeeper screamed in agony, but Kujo kept pushing the pike deeper. The pike was tied by rope to the short sword Azuma was carrying. Azuma had survived the vomit rain by holding a boulder over his head like an umbrella. Hearing Kujo's signal, he dropped the boulder and pulled the rope with all his strength. The pike burst out through the gatekeeper's belly, and Kujo, still holding it, was yanked toward Azuma along with it. Azuma caught him safely and commended him as the gatekeeper roared. Blood, vomit, and intestines spilled from its belly, visibly weakening it. Kujo took the short sword and stepped onto the flat side of Azuma's halberd. Using every fiber of his strength, Azuma launched Kujo over the gatekeeper. Kujo landed and grabbed onto one of its chains. The next step of their plan was to target the seams in the belly. The flesh itself was too thick, and cutting it apart with the weapons in this world would be difficult. But slicing through the seams should be easier, and one strike there could affect the blood flow of 2 bodies at once. Based on its structure, there should be 2 bodies worth of blood vessels running through each seam. If he cut straight down vertically, it would affect all 4 bodies and force them into hypovolemic shock from blood loss. So Kujo did exactly that. He sliced one seam from top to bottom. In a single cut, he had already split half of it. All he needed to do was climb up and do the same on the other side. But the gatekeeper wouldn't let it happen. It launched an attack at Kujo. He didn't notice until it was too late, but Azuma parried the strike before it could hit him. Azuma acted as a distraction while Kujo worked, planning to wound the gatekeeper even more than Kujo already had. With the gatekeeper distracted, Kujo climbed up again. But before he could slice the other seam, a hand came at him. Luckily, it hit the chain instead. Kujo froze in shock. He thought the gatekeeper was still focused on Azuma. He wondered what had happened to him. Because the belly was already half cut, the impact tore the chain loose from the gatekeeper's body. The chain flew off with Kujo still hanging on it. And in the distance, Azuma was leaning against the chain wall, bleeding. The chain was massive, like the ones used on ships, and at its end was a hook. It crashed to the ground with a huge thud, the hook embedding itself in the floor. The gatekeeper roared. It was badly weakened, but still moving toward Azuma's unconscious body. Kujo screamed for Azuma to move, and just in time Azuma woke up and dodged the attack. He cursed. It was too hard to evade all those arms. Then he realized why the gatekeeper could now reach the safe zone. The hook had come loose because of the tear in its belly. Azuma kept running and dodging, but he had nowhere to go. The chain wall was still up. Kujo knew he had to help before Azuma got killed, but rushing in wouldn't solve anything. They still had to finish it. If only he could land one more attack. But climbing onto it now would be much harder while it moved freely. As he searched for another way to strike the belly, he noticed the gatekeeper was using its claws to hook into the floor earlier. With no better option, Kujo bet on a hunch. He climbed toward the chain connected to the gate and yelled for Azuma to grab the rope and lure the gatekeeper toward him. Azuma followed the plan while Kujo reached the chain slot in the gate. It was jammed. Azuma pulled the gatekeeper toward the hook, and when it got close enough, Kujo used all his strength to force the chain loose, breaking his sword in the process. The chain suddenly began retracting into the gate. Kujo had noticed earlier that the gatekeeper was being dragged by the chain. Now that it was lighter after expelling so much acid, it couldn't resist the pull anymore. The chain would restrain it. The retracting hook slammed into one of the gatekeeper's arms, yanking it toward the gate and hanging it up like a fish on a line. Azuma stared in shock that Kujo's plan had worked, but Kujo shouted at him to pass the other end of the rope before the gatekeeper broke free. Azuma understood. Kujo quickly climbed up and looped the rope through the torn section of the gatekeeper's belly. Then, Kujo and Azuma pulled with everything they had. In an instant, the gatekeeper split in half. All four heads screamed in agony, writhing violently. Kujo couldn't believe they had defeated it. They could finally proceed to the mountain, but suddenly one of the torsos attacked and grabbed Kujo. The gatekeeper had split into 4 large humanoid end humans. Some were barely standing, bleeding heavily, with their guts hanging out. One roared at Kujo and started squeezing him. Azuma told him there shouldn't be any creature that could properly function in that state. In that moment, the one holding Kujo collapsed, and the others followed. It spoke weakly before finally dying. It was finally over. They were finally able to advance. Then raven feathers began raining down across the area, and Timoria appeared, congratulating them. Before the two could react, she approached Azuma and commended him for being flexible enough to form allies even at the cost of gaining more rivals. She also praised his methods and body enhancement techniques and the way he cornered the gatekeeper. She called him remarkable. Azuma said nothing. Timoria then turned to Kujo and praised his quick thinking at the end, and his mental fortitude for enduring surgery despite everything he had suffered. She said she was impressed that they had overcome God's trial and that they could now proceed up the mountain because they possessed souls worthy of resurrection. Azuma finally spoke and called bullshit. Timoria was the one who had created the gatekeeper to stop them. Kujo remembered Azuma mentioning this before and asked how he had reached that conclusion. Azuma said that during one of his previous attempts, he had managed to kill one of the gatekeeper's heads, though he was also fatally injured. That was when Timoria appeared and commented that Azuma had damaged her best work to date. She had also said that since he had injured it so badly, she would have to attach a new candidate to it. Azuma didn't know how she had created such a monster, but he was certain of one thing: this woman had no intention of letting them reach the summit. Kujo got angry and demanded to know why she would do that. He asked if resurrection was just a lie. Timoria told him to calm down and reassured him that someone like her could not overturn what God had ordained. There was no lie. Kujo asked what she wanted. Timoria walked to the gatekeeper's remains and took its soul. Then she removed her eye patch and absorbed the soul into her eye. She answered that she guides corrupted souls, purifies them, and returns them to God. After she absorbed it, the gatekeeper's body turned to ash. Kujo and Azuma were shocked by what they were seeing. Timoria then told them that their goal had not changed. They still had to reach the summit. From inside the gate, 2 giant end humans chained to it began pulling it open. The gate finally opened, and Timoria told them to proceed. Kujo was furious, but Azuma was strangely calm. He walked toward the gate, but as he passed Timoria, he suddenly tried to sucker punch her. Timoria instantly drew her scythe and blocked it with ease. She asked what he was doing when he could finally advance, and whether he wanted to be sent back to the start. Azuma gritted his teeth. He knew he had no chance of winning. He cursed her and said he would overcome everything and reach the summit. Kujo, hesitant at first, gathered his courage and moved forward too. Near the gate, he felt tremors. At first, he thought it was an earthquake, but Timoria told him it was just little pests. When Kujo and Azuma looked back, they saw a stampede of people running toward them. It seemed they had been hiding and waiting for the gate to open, and now that the gatekeeper was finally defeated, they were rushing in. Kujo and Azuma readied themselves since everyone coming in was armed. But instead of attacking, the crowd just ran past them and went inside the gate. Seeing this, Timoria snapped her fingers. In an instant, the giant end humans began retreating, pulling the gate closed. Kujo and Azuma dashed forward and made it inside just before it shut. When they looked back, Timoria was bowing, saying, "Beyond this point, what awaits the powerless is..." She never finished the sentence. What a jackass. The humans who rushed in started cheering. Some were even crying. After so long, they could finally move forward. Azuma gritted his teeth at the freeloaders. Then a long-haired man stepped forward and apologized for taking advantage of them. He said he understood they wouldn't be happy about it, but for powerless people like them, it was the only option. They had all challenged the monster, but they had no special powers, so they kept dying, no matter how hard they tried. They had no choice but to wait nearby. He said they had waited 2 years before Kujo and Azuma showed up, and some had waited even longer. The man grabbed Kujo's hand and bowed, thanking them with tears in his eyes, because now they could finally move on. Kujo was uncomfortable with his sincere gratitude, while Azuma remained skeptical. That's when someone warned them they were about to be attacked from behind. Kujo and Azuma turned around and saw 3 armed humans ready to strike from behind. It looked like the long-haired man had been distracting them while those 3 moved in to kill them. The long-haired man shouted at a girl named Sheena, asking why she ratted them out. Sheena said it wasn't her intention to interfere and told everyone to hold off on fighting. From this point onward, everything was unknown, so it would be better to work together for now. The long-haired man argued that Kujo and Azuma were too strong. If they kept climbing together, no one else would be resurrected. They had to kill them now, while they were still injured from fighting the gatekeeper, to buy time. Azuma shoved Sheena aside and said it was perfect. He was already pissed off at Temoria anyway. He told the humans he'd vent all that frustration by tearing them to shreds. The humans quickly formed up and took their stances. The long-haired man ordered them to aim for Kujo and Azuma's heads. Sheena still tried to de-escalate, saying that teaming up would increase their odds of survival, since this area could be full of monsters like the gatekeeper. In the next moment, someone spoke from behind them, agreeing with Sheena. But before they could turn around to see who it was, he impaled 2 men through the chest. The one who attacked them smiled and said that from this point onward, the mountain was full of monsters. It was a modified human. It looked like it had gone through surgery similar to Azuma and Kujo. But this one had an extra pair of huge arms growing from its back. The modified man pulled his arm free from the 2 people he had impaled. 2 humans stepped up and readied their stances, but they were instantly torn apart by his whip-like arms. He laughed at how soft they were and said he was lucky. What were the odds he'd be here right when the gate opened? He added that there were so many rabbits to use as food. Grinning creepily, he called it a rabbit hunting buffet, which terrified everyone. As the massacre began, Kujo watched from a distance. He couldn't believe they had encountered someone with enhancements like theirs. The long-haired man tried to run, and several others followed. They had come this far. They refused to die now. They tried hiding in the fog, but 4 arms mocked them and said it was useless. The fog wouldn't save them. There was another modified human with huge eyes that could see clearly through it. Let's call him Eyes. He acted as reconnaissance and called out enemy positions to his allies. One fleeing group ran into another of his comrades. It's a woman. They kept running toward her, underestimating her. She called out to her pet, a tall, muscular end human with boulder-like fists. The group froze in terror, not knowing what to do. Another fleeing group, the one with the long-haired man, realized the fog wasn't enough to escape. Without warning, one of his companions was suddenly decapitated. Before they could understand what happened, another was decapitated too. The long-haired man was left alone. He grabbed his friend's corpse and tried to use it as a shield. Through the fog, he saw a silhouette throwing something. A split second later, a boomerang came from his right and cleanly took his head off. His head hit the floor, and all he could do was cry. He was being sent back to the start. All those years of waiting were wasted. The boomerang master, also a modified human, praised himself for his accuracy. While Kujo and Azuma watched the hunt, Kujo asked what those things were. But Azuma cut him off and said this wasn't the time. Fighting them now was unfavorable, and they might have even more allies nearby. They needed to move in another direction. Eyes spotted Kujo and Azuma running and called out their location. As they ran along the wall, Kujo asked why they were sticking to it. Azuma said it was a detour. They would head up the mountain once they reached a safer route. Kujo noticed movement and yanked Azuma toward him, saving him from a boomerang. The boomerang master cursed Kujo for ruining his perfect shot and said he was going to kill them both. Four Arms appeared behind them and remarked that Kujo and Azuma's enhancements were well made. He said they would capture them since they'd make excellent material. Cornered, Kujo and Azuma had no choice but to fight. They turned to face the two modified humans. The boomerang master screeched and stepped back, using his enhanced legs to launch his boomerang with full force. It flew so fast it seemed to cut through the wind, but Kujo and Azuma both managed to evade it. Four Arms was nearly hit too, and snapped at his ally not to drag him into it. Boomer was visibly frustrated that he still couldn't land a hit. As the boomerang curved back toward him, Azuma charged like a raging bull and tackled him to the ground. He locked in a chokehold and quickly analyzed Boomer's body. His legs were frog-like, clearly built for his boomerang-based fighting style. Azuma tightened the choke, furious. Seeing others using the same kind of modifications only added another obstacle between him and the summit. Boomer struggled for air, then used his long legs to unmount Azuma. While flipping in the air, he kicked Azuma with both feet and sent him flying. The hit landed square in Azuma's midsection and launched him toward the boomerang. Boomer then panicked when he realized the boomerang was nowhere to be seen. Azuma forced himself back up, still reeling from the impact. Since he had separated Boomer from his weapon, he decided to destroy it and force hand-to-hand combat. He gripped the boomerang and squeezed until cracks spread across it. Boomer rushed in, enraged, and drop-kicked Azuma in the face, sending him crashing to the ground. He followed up by stomping Azuma repeatedly while he was down. Azuma could only guard and endure. Kujo watched Azuma getting beaten and was about to help him when Four Arms, standing behind him, spoke, asking if it was wise to turn his back on a wolf. Four Arms swung one of his whip-like arms at Kujo, but Kujo raised his guard and blocked it. His arm endured the impact. Four Arms grimaced at the sensation of hitting Kujo, saying he preferred striking human flesh over end-human flesh. He attacked again, but Kujo dodged. He kept attacking, and Kujo kept evading. Kujo realized that if he only dodged, he would eventually lose, so he charged in to intercept one strike and managed to catch one of Four Arms' arms. Four Arms smiled and said it wasn't bad. But when he tried to pull his arm back, it wouldn't budge. Kujo put all his strength into a judo throw and slammed him toward the ground, but Four Arms used another long arm to absorb the impact, stopping himself in a handstand. Four Arms praised Kujo's strength, saying Kujo's body was clearly stronger than his. Kujo tried to throw him again, but Four Arms maneuvered out and kicked Kujo in the knee, forcing him back. Four Arms kicked again, so Kujo let go and raised his guard, but it was a feint. Four Arms immediately used his long arms to whip Kujo across the sides. The impact dropped Kujo to his knees. Four Arms trash-talked him, saying he fought like an amateur and was terrible at using his strength, and that he was wasting a valuable body. Then Azuma screamed, drawing both their attention. Azuma had been defeated by Boomer, who had pinned Azuma's arm to the ground with his legs. Four Arms called out, telling Boomer not to overdo it and not to forget why they were doing this. Boomer stopped and calmed down. Four Arms then pinned Kujo to the ground and told Boomer it was time to retrieve the people they had hunted. He told Kujo and Azuma that they would be key components in their enhancements and that they would dismantle them slowly. Kujo and Azuma gritted their teeth. Then, suddenly, Sheena appeared behind Boomer, holding a mace and trying to strike him. Four Arms tried to warn him, but it was too late. Sheena was able to strike Boomer in the back of his head. This gave them a chance to move. Kujo was able to use his strength to get out of Four Arms' pin and kick him in the stomach, sending him to the ground. Kujo called out to Azuma, and Azuma got up and carried Sheena as they ran away. Because of their superior bodies, they were able to get away quickly, and clearly Four Arms couldn't catch up to them, and their fastest guy was passed out because of Sheena's strike. His other allies arrived and told Four Arms that they had finished collecting their hunt, and it seemed that their harvest was bountiful. Asami, the woman with a slave and human, was surprised that Boomer got defeated, while Eyes commented that it was a shame since Kujo and Azuma were fantastic material. Four Arms then asked if they should pursue them, and Eyes agreed, saying that they should split up. Asami would be the one to bring the meat home because its value declines as it loses freshness, while Eyes and Four Arms would pursue them. Since they were already on their territory, escape was impossible for someone who had just passed through the gate. They were doomed to be hunted down. Eyes told them that they must capture them at all costs before they were hunted down. After the three got away, Sheena threw up because of motion sickness. Kujo thanked her for her help and asked her why she saved them. Sheena reassured him, telling him that she didn't have any ill intentions and didn't have any ulterior motives either. She just wanted to be included in their party. Kujo asked why she wanted to join them, and Sheena replied that she couldn't compete with them in terms of strength, but if there were a lot of people like the ones they encountered earlier, she would have no chance of surviving here. Right now, her best option was to rely on the two of them. Azuma told her that she was not allowed to join and added that he and Kujo were not teammates, they just had a cooperative relationship. He told Sheena that if she was no help in a fight, what was the point of bringing her along? Sheena told him that she took a considerable risk helping them, even though she was weak, and asked if he could take that into consideration. Azuma told her that they let her enter the gate, so that should make them even. Azuma told Kujo that they were done here and started to walk away. Sheena then asked him if they knew what lay ahead, which caught the two off guard. She continued, telling them that she knew what lay ahead and how to proceed, since she had information. Kujo was shocked, while Azuma was skeptical and asked if Sheena was messing with them. He told her that trying to win them over with lies was pointless, but Sheena denied that she was lying, telling Azuma that she wasn't stupid and that it would bite her in the ass if she did something like that and got caught. Sheena told them that she could proceed with this information alone, but having the two of them would increase her odds of survival. On the other hand, they would know about the dangers in advance, and she added that this relationship would benefit them both. Azuma still couldn't trust her, and it was strange for her to have this information. Kujo agreed with Azuma. How could Sheena know anything when she had never been past the gate? Sheena was not surprised that they were skeptical and told them how she got this information because of a certain place. She arrived at the gate about a year ago. It was only through forming allies and cooperating that she finally made it there. However, she felt something odd. She noticed the floor had a wall mechanism. She tried to stop her group, but it was too late, and the wall mechanism was activated by the gatekeeper. She ended up surviving purely due to luck. Sheena lost all of her hope. She had finally made it far, only to end up alone. She was stuck with no way forward or back. Even if she were lucky enough to get new allies, that wasn't an opponent they could possibly defeat. She was at a loss, and all she could do was wander through the fog. That's when she found a place. It was east of the gate. The gate was clearly visible from the top of that place, and that place had a community. 30 to 40 people were living there. One old man spoke to her and told her that this was the place where all hope was lost because of the gatekeeper. This place was called the Waiting in Vain Boulder. As the name suggests, a place to wait for the person who would open the gate. At first, Sheena thought it was stupid. There was no guarantee that person would ever appear. It was insane to keep waiting, clinging to such a small hope. She couldn't fathom defeating the gatekeeper. That's why Sheena decided to join them and wait until she came up with some solution. Azuma interrupted her story and told her that they didn't have time for her ramblings. But Sheena told him to listen and continued. After she started living on the boulder, she began to notice something off. The first thing she noticed was that everyone there had solid survival skills. And what's more, they all had the same set of skills. It was as if they had gained knowledge from the same person. The most surprising thing was that order was maintained. It was odd since this world was all about the survival of the fittest. A place where people just gather should become lawless. And Sheena, as a woman, would be easy prey. Needless to say, she was always on guard. However, that wasn't the case. No one tried to attack her, there wasn't even a hint of it. In fact, it felt like everyone was committed to working together. The food mostly consisted of end human meat. The assigned members for the day would hunt together and share the meat with the rest. When someone tried to disrupt that order, everyone at the boulder would execute them. Azuma called it bullshit, adding that everyone here sought resurrection, so it was impossible. That's what Sheena thought too at first, so she asked them about it, and they guided her to a place. It was a cavern. Inside, the walls were full of instructions. It seemed that the first people who waited at the boulder wrote them to avoid having to explain things to those who would come later. Survival skills, the rules of the boulder, everything was explained in great detail. After Sheena read everything, she understood why everyone was following the rules. In a way, you're fighting the end human transformation just by waiting. The key point is how not to wear down your spirit. That's why everyone followed the rules and cooperated. Even though it was temporary, they were building a sense of peace. Even if it was just a small glimmer of hope, it was all for the sake of crossing the gate. Kujo remembered something similar, the village that he burned before. Sheena continued that they ended up living together for a long time. It was a shame that they couldn't cooperate a little longer after they crossed the gate. Azuma spoke and told her that he was now even more puzzled. The crucial point was missing. There was no guarantee those people would be able to advance, even if someone opened the gate. How could they follow the rules with that unknown factor? Sheena answered Azuma, telling him that it was all written down. They had confirmation. The first thing that was written was information beyond the gate. If the information was correct, it meant someone had crossed the gate using this method. Azuma interrupted once again, saying that it didn't add up. Why would it have information about what was beyond the gate? He asked Sheena if it meant the one who wrote these instructions crossed the gate and then returned. On top of that, he asked if she expected them to believe that someone would just hand over such valuable information. It was ridiculous. Sheena agreed, saying that it was also a mystery to her. The knowledge, the rules, all the information on the wall said it was written by a single individual. Apparently, it was someone who had been traveling through this world and loved adventure. This shocked Kujo. It sounded like someone he knew. Kujo immediately grabbed Sheena and asked what his name was, which caught her and Azuma off guard. If Kujo's hunch was correct, the one who wrote these instructions might be Tetsu, the old guy who had helped him before. Sheena told him that the name was not mentioned, which left Kujo disappointed. Sheena continued, saying that it was all thanks to that information that she was able to keep the end human transformation at bay and cross the gate. She was able to keep going because there was hope. Azuma still didn't believe her words, and told her that there was no way such a convenient adventurer's guide could exist. Even if what she was saying was true, it would make more sense for it to be a trap meant to obstruct rivals. Azuma told Kujo that it was a waste of time and urged him to go, but Kujo refused and told Azuma that he was going with her, which shocked him since there was no credibility to her story. Sheena agreed, saying that she thought the same. That was why she was going to show them something to prove it. She told them to follow her and guided them toward a rock with a bloodied cloth. Sheena happened to see it while they were escaping earlier. The wall had mentioned this blood-stained skin and said to go in the direction the rock pointed to a certain place. She had been with them the whole time, so there was no way she could have planned this in advance. This was the proof Sheena showed Azuma to earn his trust. Kujo told Azuma that there was no difference either way. What lay ahead was an unknown world, and it was dangerous no matter which path they chose. Azuma finally agreed and added that they would not protect her, and the moment she became a hindrance, they would ditch her. Sheena walked beside the two of them and told him that being able to tag along was already a big win. She thanked Kujo for helping persuade Azuma and introduced herself, but Kujo, still traumatized from being betrayed before, kept his distance from her. Later, they arrived at an overgrown forest obscured with branches that hindered their movement. They had no choice but to continue since this was the safest route that kept them hidden. Eventually, they found another stained skin on a branch. Azuma told Sheena to tell them everything that was written on the wall. But Sheena refused, saying that if she did, she would no longer be needed and would be kicked out. So for now, she would only provide information when necessary. After climbing and walking, they finally reached the end and saw, from a distance, towering walls, and in the middle stood a huge chimney. Kujo asked what the chimney was doing there, but it seemed that Azuma had already figured it out. The fact that fire was coming out of the top meant something was being heated inside. Judging by the shape, it was a huge furnace. The first thing that came to mind with a furnace was metal. It was hard to believe, but apparently iron was being made there. And of course, weapons, martial arts, medical body enhancements, and so on. It seemed like all kinds of technology to make you stronger were being developed in that place. It was the largest settlement on this mountain, the City of Power, commonly known as the Purgatory District. That explained why the bodies of the hunters they encountered earlier were enhanced. Azuma then told Sheena that they should take a detour. It wasn't that he disliked technology, he just didn't want to go to a place doing the same thing as him, which made it dangerous. Kujo agreed. If many were like the hunters from before, it would be difficult. Sheena told them that she shared the same sentiments, but they didn't exactly have a choice. If the information from the wall was correct, advancing without going through the Purgatory District was practically impossible. In order to attempt the summit, they would need to go to that city to obtain citizenship. Azuma asked if they needed permission from the city to climb, but Sheena told him that it was a little different from permission. Walking around the vicinity of the city, they arrived at a mining site where there were tons of people working, mining for coal and hauling it toward the furnace. It was grotesque, since some of the men working were on the verge of turning into end-humans. Sheena told them that these were the people without citizenship. If you failed to obtain or lost your citizenship and were captured by the people of the city, you would apparently be treated as a slave like those people, until you became an end-human or food. Azuma asked why they were obedient to the point of being slaves, since there were plenty of ways to escape. It seemed that some of the slaves working also had serious enhancements on their bodies, which made fighting an option. Then, a beast-like end-human emerged from the forest, 3 times bigger than Azuma, and attacked the slaves, mauling them. Kujo couldn't believe that something like this was normal here. When the beast was about to eat a slave, something pierced its side. It was so powerful that it went straight through. It was a ballista arrow. The beast collapsed to the ground. The trio looked toward where the attack came from and saw a guard watching over the slaves. It was a huge human with body enhancements and multiple eyes, so muscular that he looked like the Hulk. He was armored with iron and carried iron weapons, including a ballista that he could hold with one arm. The guard gripped his axe and fired another shot at the beast, pinning it to the ground. He rushed toward it, bashed its face with the ballista, and cut off one of its arms. The beast groaned and tried to attack, but the guard spun with his axe and cut off its other hand, making it collapse to the ground, unable to get up. That's when the guard used his axe again to split its head. In just a moment, the guard killed the beast. Kujo and Azuma were speechless, while the slaves cheered that they were saved. But then another guard stepped forward, just as huge as the first one, and threatened the slaves. He said no one told them they could stop working and ordered them to move, or he would chop them to pieces. Sheena laughed nervously and asked the two if the city was filled with people like that, which made them uneasy just thinking about it. Azuma analyzed the guards, their body modifications and high-precision weapons, and even their movements, showed a high level of skill. So this was what you'd expect from a place doing large-scale enhancement research. Once those things set their sights on you, it wouldn't be easy to get away. Kujo concluded that it would be better to approach the city carefully. If they got enslaved, they would never be able to aim for the summit. Rather than risking being caught, they should avoid it from the start. Still, even with all the people in the city, it wouldn't be enough to cover the entire mountain. Sheena told him that he was right. The people from the city weren't enough. Unfortunately, there was a system in place to catch anyone who tried to bypass it. The city was cleverly designed. Through the provision of enhancement technology, it seemed that those who were granted citizenship could receive the city's enhancements, as long as they paid the price. The price was the most valuable thing in this world: humans. Food, slaves, materials for necessary enhancements. The more you paid, the higher the weapon quality, and the more advanced the enhancements you could access. That was the impression Kujo and Azuma had given off at the gate. Two enhanced individuals like themselves would probably fetch a high price. Those seeking even more power to reach the summit hunted large numbers of people every day and handed them over to the city. Sheena wondered how many people like that were on this mountain. If they stayed here, they would be targeted by every single one of them. It meant they had no choice but to aim for the summit. They already had to deal with the end human they saw earlier. The thought of facing those people on top of that terrified Sheena. Azuma asked whether, regardless of being the hunter or the hunted, the rules applied equally, even among citizens. How was it any different from just sneaking past them? Sheena answered that acquiring citizenship apparently prohibited you from attacking fellow citizens. According to the wall, when you acquired citizenship, you received some sort of proof. There was a rule stating that those who had it weren't allowed to fight, whether inside or outside the city. It said that if you broke the rule, you would never be given enhancements again and would be turned into a slave. Azuma then asked what the point of a rule like that was. Maybe it was to ensure the meat supply didn't dwindle. Sheena told him that not being able to enhance oneself was a matter of life and death for anyone aiming for the summit. Basically, citizens were very likely to avoid conflict with each other. Kujo finally understood why citizenship was a must and asked how they could obtain one. Sheena replied that there were two ways. One was the straightforward approach: hunt a large number of humans and hand them over. A method of obtaining recognition from the city for your usefulness. Sheena didn't want to do that, since it would take a long time and was mentally and physically taxing. So the alternative was the backdoor option, where they would infiltrate the city to obtain citizenship. At the mining site, one of the slaves broke down and fell from fatigue. When the guard noticed this, he lifted him by the head while the slave begged, saying he could still work. But the guard just jabbed an ice pick into his temple and told him that he was going to the food pile. He kept twisting the ice pick until the slave's body went limp, then threw him onto a huge pile of dead slaves who had met the same fate. The trio were hiding nearby and had managed to get close to the mining site. This was their only choice, since a tall wall encircled the city, so they had to sneak in through the service gate disguised as slaves. They had to pretend to be slaves. Sheena told the two that they could stay as they were, while she had to blend in a little more. She took out a small knife and picked a corpse. Then she started skinning its entire head and placed it over her own. She felt disgusted just putting it on. Azuma then told her that it would be suspicious if it fell off along the way, so he would have to sew it directly onto her face. Sheena agreed, since she didn't want to be a hindrance to them. Azuma began immediately, not waiting for Sheena to prepare herself mentally, since if they stayed there too long, they would get caught. Sheena had no choice but to endure and muffle her screams. Moments later, they managed to blend in. They are now in pairs, carrying stick full of rocks. They got in smoothly, because everyone was near the stage of end human transformation. Now they just had to get through the service gate. Kujo saw Sheena struggling to lift the load, so he decided to use a bit of his strength to help her. Sheena thanked him, but Kujo told her not to mention it and to just keep her eyes forward. Sheena now understood why all these slaves were close to becoming end humans. Doing this day in and day out must be hell. Kujo agreed, but what puzzled him was why these people kept working no matter how terrified they were. If the alternative was just waiting to become an end human or food, wouldn't it be better to just die and be done with it? Then he heard one of the slaves whispering repeatedly about the days left on his sentence, which confused him even more. They finally arrived at the service gate, and everyone going inside was being inspected by two hulking guards. From here on, there would be no talking among themselves. Kujo did his best to avoid the guard's gaze, which worked, and they were able to get in. All that was left was to sneak into the city, but after they passed, Azuma was stopped. The guard questioned him, saying he didn't recall seeing a man as prominent as Azuma before, and asked if he really was a slave. Avoiding direct eye contact, Azuma told the guard that he was new, which only made the guard more suspicious. He told the other guard to bring the hound over. They opened a cage, and what emerged was an end-human chained like a dog. It had no eyes, but it had large canines and an enormous nose. The hound approached Azuma and started barking, which made Kujo worried. One of the guards then grabbed Azuma by the neck and told him they would find out whether he really was a slave. The end-human got extremely close to Azuma and sniffed him, even moving right up to his face. Kujo thought Azuma was done for and tried to step in, but Sheena stopped him. Suddenly, the hound backed away, trembling, and started covering its nose. The guard finally let Azuma go and, at last, believed that he was a newcomer. He told him to hurry up and move along while they brought the hound back to its cage. Kujo asked what just happened and what they had checked. Sheena took out a sausage-like object and told him that this was what the hound had been looking for. It was the thing Sheena had been searching for earlier while she was opening some of the corpses, and she had told them to hide it under their clothes. Azuma asked what it was exactly, since there shouldn't be anything like that in a human body. Sheena answered that it was a scent-marking sausage. She didn't know what was inside, but apparently it was stuffed with foul-smelling substances. It gets embedded somewhere in your body when you become a slave. It's what separates slaves from non-slaves. The hound from earlier could smell it even when it was inside the body. It was used to check whether someone was a slave, like earlier, and its main purpose was to retrieve slaves who had returned after death. This sausage was made using parts of the body. The wall once said that once it's embedded, it gets passed on even after death. Those end-human hounds will follow the scent. It's almost certain you'd be recaptured. Azuma realized why the slaves wouldn't try to escape by dying. That explained it. They knew it would only be in vain. The words they kept mumbling suggested there must be some kind of relief after working for a certain period of time. Whether they tried to escape by dying or continued as slaves, they would still get closer to becoming end-humans. So they chose what was certain over what was dangerous and uncertain. The person who came up with this system was truly cunning and wicked. Kujo then asked what they would do next. Sheena gestured for him to stay quiet, since there was a guard nearby. As they neared the furnace, there were guards stationed everywhere. They were acting as lookouts. It meant that the furnace was that important to the city. Kujo began to question whether they could really infiltrate the city. Then, suddenly, Sheena spoke and told them that she had found it. Sheena told the two that they would make their move up ahead and that they should follow her. They arrived at an open area that looked like an ore storage site. Guards were watching over the iron ore and the slaves. Kujo then heard the slaves whisper that something was coming, and they began to hurry. While the trio was in the middle of moving, guards arrived at the storage area to patrol. After the guards passed them, they made their move and followed Sheena. When they reached the iron fence, Sheena suddenly started climbing into a pile of ore, which confused the two. Sheena told them to hurry. They have to get inside the rock pile. She explained that they had to remain hidden until nightfall because, according to what she read on the wall, the slaves' work ended at night. That meant security would be more relaxed, and they could use that opportunity. They would pass the iron fence and sneak behind the furnace, then go around to the ironworks, climb the wall, and enter the city. Kujo told her that the plan was too reckless. Even if they moved at night, they would still be out in the open, and there might be security there. Sheena reassured him, saying that according to the wall, that area would be covered in shadow from the furnace flames, and they could use the darkness as cover. Apparently, hardly anyone ever went behind the furnace. Not even the guards. They should be fine as long as they kept an eye on the guards on the wall. Kujo asked if it would really be that easy, to which Sheena replied that it wasn't easy at all. The first step was to endure half a day buried in heavy iron ore. It wasn't exactly a great plan, but this was how someone had made it past before. They had no choice but to follow it. Sheena told the two that there was no time to think of alternatives and urged them to hurry before the guards came back. Kujo and Azuma finally agreed and moved to join her. But suddenly, a bell rang, catching everyone's attention. Azuma asked what the bell meant, but Sheena had no idea. One of the slaves started screaming that they were screwed, and some of the others panicked and tried to escape. But the guards saw this and quickly cut them off, bashing them with a ballista and sending them crashing to the ground, their faces and teeth shattered. The guard told them that they should already know, once the bell rings, it means that everyone there has been selected for duty. Kujo wondered what was about to begin. One of the guards dropped a tray full of baskets and told everyone to fill them with rocks and start climbing the furnace. The slaves began to groan and scream. Some even complained that they were already on the verge of turning into endhumans and begged for mercy. But the guards shut them up, telling them that if they didn't want to do it, they could join the food pile instead. The trio panicked. At this rate, their plan was not going to work. Then one of the guards appeared behind them and asked what they were doing, ordering them to move. They had no choice but to follow the order and carry baskets full of rocks. As they got in line and approached the furnace, Kujo felt the intensity of the heat even from a distance. The moment he stepped onto the stairs, his sandals sizzled. They had only just started climbing, and he was already drenched in sweat. While climbing, he accidentally touched the wall for support, and it burned his palm. That was to be expected since it was used to melt iron, but it was still unbelievably hot. If it was this hot at the bottom, Kujo couldn't imagine how hot the top would be. He had no choice but to keep climbing. Some of the slaves who were barefoot already had the soles of their feet burned. When they finally reached the very top, the flames were overwhelming. Their bodies felt like they were burning, and the moisture in the air evaporated instantly. They could barely keep their eyes open. Even with his enhanced body, Kujo could hardly endure the heat. Some of the slaves started fighting because the ones in front were moving too slowly and dragging their feet. They shoved each other, causing one to fall into the furnace and the other to fall all the way to the bottom. One burned to death, while the other died from the fall. The guard below called out that they were down 2 slaves. Kujo analyzed the situation while Sheena urged him to hurry up since it was unbearably hot. After dumping the rocks, they headed back down, only to repeat the process all night. Kujo asked about their plan to infiltrate the city, and Sheena told him that this situation was unexpected. They were now in quite a predicament. With that much surveillance, hiding in the ore pile would be difficult. Even if they somehow managed it, the guards had already seen their faces earlier while they were trying to hide. They might now be under close watch, so Sheena thought they couldn't risk hiding during this job. Kujo grumbled. It seemed they had no choice but to wait for another opportunity. But Azuma told him that wouldn't work. The guard had announced earlier that they were down 2 slaves, meaning there was a high chance the number of slaves was being tracked. If there happened to be a roll call every day, then by the end of it, they would realize that the trio had blended in with the slaves. While the trio was talking among themselves, they failed to notice that they were holding up the line. The slaves behind them started yelling, telling them to move or they would push them. They had no choice but to keep going. Kujo kept thinking about what Azuma had said earlier, that they would be exposed by the end of the day. Simply slipping away and entering the city wasn't enough either. If the city realized they had infiltrated it and sent pursuers after them, obtaining citizenship would become impossible. And if they got caught, they would become real slaves until they eventually turned into endhumans. They continued hauling rocks and repeating the process. While working, Kujo desperately tried to think of a way to enter the city, but time was running out and they were growing exhausted. As they neared the top again, Azuma suddenly dropped to his knees from exhaustion. His massive body required constant food, making the labor even harder on him. The slaves behind them began yelling again, telling Azuma to move because he was holding up the line. Azuma snapped back, telling them to shut up and wait a second. Kujo told him that no one was left at the furnace anymore, so they had to hurry. Azuma struggled back to his feet and staggered toward the furnace. But while they were dumping the rocks, Azuma stumbled into Sheena, and the two of them fell toward the furnace. Kujo immediately reached out and grabbed Sheena's arm, trying to pull her back, but they were too heavy. Kujo was dragged down with them, and the three of them fell into the furnace, burning as they screamed in agony. The slaves behind them watched it all happen, and all they could do was offer quiet condolences. But behind those flames, on the other side of the furnace, the trio burst out of the fire. They gasped for breath, and it seemed that their modified bodies had managed to endure the flames. Earlier, Kujo had managed to come up with a plan and asked Azuma how long they could survive in the fire. At first, Sheena thought he was considering returning through death, but that wasn't it. At this point, they would be exposed even if they entered the city, and they would never be able to obtain citizenship while being pursued. So Kujo thought of jumping into the fire and faking their deaths before entering the city. Sheena asked how they would do that, and Kujo explained that the guards were strict, but they never came close to the furnace because the heat was difficult for them to endure as well. If they were going to escape, it could only be done at the top of the furnace. First, they would somehow stop the line near the top and wait for the slaves around the fire to clear out. It wouldn't take long, since everyone wanted to get away from the flames as quickly as possible. That would be their moment. While pretending to fall into the fire, they would instead jump to the other side, where no one was present. From there, they would jump down onto the building below. With this plan, the only ones who would have seen them last were the slaves behind them. If they blended into the darkness of the night, they should be able to stay hidden as they jumped down. All that would remain was surviving the fall. They hit the ground hard and rolled several times before finally stopping. It hurt badly, but they managed to survive. Kujo got up and looked below to check if anyone had noticed them, but it seemed their plan had worked. Everything was continuing as usual. Kujo then checked on the other two, who were barely managing to stand. Azuma admitted that he hadn't expected the impact to be that intense. After resting for a bit, they started moving again before anyone could spot them. They climbed the wall, and what appeared before their eyes was the Purgatory District.